Alright, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Happy Saturday. We all made it. Oh, hey, Girly Bear. How you doing today? Okay, gonna work in the background. Cool. Just let me know if my sounds are off. I just updated OBS, so things are kind of not quite set properly yet. Jolt Insight. I'm good. How are you today? Very good. I'm a little tired. I stayed up a little bit too late playing. Actually, I completed, what was it, Warhammer 40k Chaos Gate Demon Hunter. I finished that, and then I stayed up a little bit later than that to start another game. So I'm gonna be yawning. I apologize. I got to bed about midnight. So, but other than that, I'm doing pretty good. Pretty good. I don't have any crazy plans for the weekend. Nothing like that. My daughter is sick though. She's while we tested her, we don't think she has COVID, but we're trying to keep our distance from her just in case, because if she's sick, and this is the first time she's been sick for the entirety of COVID. We've all been very, very lucky during COVID to not have gotten sick. So I'm hoping that it's not COVID and she just started going back to school and going back to the disease factory and got a little something. So yeah, me too. I'm you know, she's gonna have a shitty weekend being sick, but hopefully after that she'll be okay. We'll see. If she's still sick, we'll keep her home from school on Monday if we need to too. If she gets worse or something, we'll probably take her to the hospital and get her tested for COVID just to make sure, because COVID bad. So she's gonna be having a shitty weekend, but mine is gonna be just okay. Let's see, I got the wife's computer. We bought her a laptop, and I just got that set up and got it to her, so she's kind of having some fun with that. The guy who was doing construction on my office here, he's available again. He's going to start doing that again. There isn't a whole lot to finish, just the kind of storage area in the back and then the shelves and the kind of the book area. So hopefully in the next week or two that will get done. Then I can start moving everything in and get my office set up the way I want. He won't have time today, but he's going to start tomorrow, probably Saturday, Sunday, and Monday to work on it. So that's going to be good. And yeah, Dungeons & Dragons starts again this Sunday. We're doing Spelljammer, and I'm playing a female dwarven wizard. So that's exciting, super exciting. Anything happening with all of you out there? I got stuff going on, nothing too crazy. Sick child, a little bit of fun, but yeah, not a whole lot. I did finish the Warhammer game, which I'm almost never able to finish games because I suck at games. But I finished this one, and it was good to finish. Good to actually finish a game for once. I have another game I've been playing too. It's called what is it? King Arthur Knight's Tale. I've been playing that for a little bit. Oops. And hopefully I'll get back to playing that and maybe even be able to finish that game. We'll see. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah. Anyone have anything else before we get started? Got my tension within methods of exchange ready to share. Okay, let's get started here. The first thing we have is from Science News. This is from, I gotta share this. Oh, I didn't clean up my URLs. Bad. I'm gonna throw this in chat for you. Science News, when is this from? 14th, just a few days ago. So humans may have started tending animals almost 13,000 years ago. Evidence of charred dung may push the onset of animal husbandry back to about 2,000 years. Let's see what they have to say. Oh, Paradigm Shift. How you doing, man? Welcome. Good to see you here. Yeah, we just started, and we're going over our first article here. Humans may have started tending animals almost 13,000 years ago. How you been doing? Good that you followed me over here. Hunter-gatherer groups living in Southeast Asia may have started keeping and caring for animals nearly 13,000 years ago, roughly 2,000 earlier than previously thought. Good. Good. Welcome to the crew. Ancient plant samples extracted from present-day Syria show hints of charred dung, indicating that people were burning animal droppings by the end of the Old Stone Age, researchers report September 14th in +1. The findings suggest humans were using the dung as fuel and may have started animal tending during or even before the transition to agriculture, but what animals produced the dung and the exact nature of the animal-human relationship remain unclear. Yes, that's probably... Humans starting to tend animals before farming makes a lot of sense. They're easier because they're right there and they can work together cooperatively to do that, but then actually getting into farming is a much more difficult thing, because you really have to understand what's going on to do farming. Although just burning dung isn't necessarily proof that they're going to be they were engaging in herd domestication. They just have been taking advantage of a new resource that they found. I've seen pretty much different panels. Oh, you have? Cool. Glad to hear that. We know today that dung fuel is a valuable resource, but it hasn't really been documented prior to the Neolithic, says Alexia Smith, an archaeobotanist at the University of Connecticut in Storrs. Smith and her colleagues re-examined 43 plant samples taken in the 1970s from a residential dwelling in Abu Huraira, an archaeological site now lost under the Tabqa Dam Reservoir. The samples date from roughly 13,300 to 7,800 years ago, spanning the transition from the hunter-gatherer societies to farming and herding. Yeah, we definitely talk about that on here a little bit. Where does everything go wrong? Right about there, during that transitional state. Throughout the samples, the researchers found varying amounts of spherulites, tiny crystals that form in the intestines of animals and are deposited in dung. There was a noticeable uptick between 12,800 and 12,300 years ago. Darkened spherulites also appeared in a fire pit, evidence they were heated to between 500 and 700 degrees Celsius and probably burned. That's a high temperature. I wonder what temperatures actual fires get to. This seems to almost like they're working on biochar or something like that. I know the Aztecs, Incas kind of worked on biochar. I don't know if they did prior to that. The team then cross-referenced these findings against previously published data from Abu Huraira. It found that the dung burning coincided with a shift from circular to linear buildings, an indication of a more sedentary lifestyle, along with steadily rising numbers of wild sheep at the site and a decline in gazelle and other small game. Combined, the authors argue these findings suggest humans may have started tending animals outside their homes and were burning the piles of dung at hands as a supplement to wood. The spherulite evidence reported here confirms that the dung of some sort was used as fuel, says Naomi Miller, an archaeobotanist at the University of Pennsylvania, who was not involved with the study. Figuring out what animal left the dung could reveal whether animals were tethered outside or not. While the authors proposed wild sheep, which would have been more accommodating to capture, Miller suggests the source was probably roaming wild gazelle. Oh. Spherulites coming from off-site collection of gazelle dung stored until burning as fuel is, to my mind, more plausible interpretation, Miller says. Even if kept for a few days, she says sheep wouldn't produce large amounts of dung. The whole thing is a classic whodunit, says anthropologist Melinda Zetter, something perhaps more DNA analysis could solve. Gazelle might be the source, she says, and if captured young, the animals may have been tended for a while, even if they weren't eventually domesticated. The interesting thing is that people were experimenting with their environment, says Zetter of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. Domestication is almost incidental to that. Okay, so there's that. Just talking about that. It's interesting where they talk about the shift from more hunter-gatherer society to an agrarian society. So part of that shift is the buildings go from circular to square. That is not something that I had heard before, but I think that tends to make some sense. Circular, they're more in tune with the environment and more a part of it, whereas once you make that shift from hunter-gatherers to the agrarian revolution in the Neolithic, the relationship of the people and the needs of the people has radically changes with respect to the environment, and so should the housing and building structure reflect that. All right, any questions, comments, suggestions on that? Next one, Africa's on the front lines, but not the front pages. Vanessa Nakate on her climate fight. This is from The Guardian, and it's from today. No, the 14th. The 14th. Questions, comments? Can you guys hear the music okay? Too loud? My volume, my mic volume okay too? All right. So let me know if the sounds are okay. The new UNICEF, mic is good? Okay, awesome, thank you. The new UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador would like to see reparations from nations most responsible for climate crisis, by Nina Lakani in New York. Yeah, and this is something that I talk about in my policies. I'll go ahead and share these in here. Specifically my environmental policies and how do we deal with climate change. Yes, reparations is a part of that. Is it time for coffee? You can if you like coffee. I'm not a coffee person. I never got into that or beer or any of that stuff. Right now I'm into water, tea. I don't even really like tea. I mean, I can stand green tea, but black tea is just not good. So I shared my environmental policies and my post there on COP26, which also kind of talks about reparations as well. And I think, oh, time for yawning. Yeah. So I stayed up late playing a game. So I'm tired. I'm yawning. I'm trying not to, but I got to bed about midnight or so. And I also haven't been sleeping quite so well the last few nights because I didn't have my duloxetine, which I think if I miss that for a few days, it really messes with my sleeping. But I got that 2 days ago, and I'm kind of back into my normal sleeping schedule, except for staying up too late last night. So that has me all kind of messed up a little bit. I was naughty. Hopefully tomorrow I'll get to bed at a decent hour tonight, then I won't have to worry about that. My apologies. But yes, reparations is a big deal when it comes to climate change. Much as the title is saying here, the global north is responsible for most of the pollution here on the entire planet. Specifically the United States, especially if you take into account the U.S. military-industrial complex, is the largest polluter, not just historically, but contemporarily as well. I mean, Abby Martin at COP26 asked a question, had the great opportunity to ask a question of Nancy Pelosi, and she said, well, how can you guys be serious here at COP26 talking about the environment when the U.S. military is not part of the conversation? And she's exactly right. I blogged about that as well. That's a huge thing. We cannot, in any sense, tackle climate change without tackling U.S. imperialism. because that is a core driver of a lot of the environmental pollution, because the U.S. military and all these technologies are not, they don't have to conform to environmental laws at all. Plus, you've got all the direct damage from war and the coups, right? You destroying infrastructure, destroying people, destroying the environment, and the long-term consequences of that is much larger than just about any other thing that we do. So yes, reparations from the global north to the global south is required for us to tackle climate change. Full stop. All right, let's do this. Vanessa Nakate knows what it's like to be black and overlooked. In January 2020, an Associated Press photographer cropped Nakate from a picture of youth climate activists at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, leaving her friend Greta Thunberg and 3 other white young women in the shot. Yeah, of course. It triggered widespread outrage, rightly so, but Nakate regards that very personal experience as a symbol of how the voices and experiences of black and brown and indigenous communities are routinely erased. Africa is on the front lines of the climate crisis, but it's not on the front pages of the world's newspapers. Every activist who speaks out is telling a story about themselves and their community, but if they are ignored, the world will not know what's really happening, what solutions are working. The erasure of our voices is literally the erasure of our histories and what people hold dear to their lives, says Nakate. Yep. It's cultural, part of the genocide, the racial genocide inherent to capitalism. Nakate is a 25-year-old thoughtful, smart, and quiet-spoken climate activist from Kampala, the capital of Uganda, one of the countries most at risk from climate disasters caused by global heating. She looks familiar. That's Thunberg and the others I don't recognize. Okay, so here you go. Vanessa Nakate, Louisa Neubauer, I've heard the name, Greta Thunberg, Isabella Axelson, Lucina Till over here. This is from 2020. Nakate was cropped out of the image when it was published, so chunk, cut her off over here. Yikes. 2 climate disasters have struck Uganda this year so far. At least 29 people died and thousands were displaced in the city of Mabale in eastern Uganda after heavy rainfall caused 2 rivers to burst their banks, submerging homes, shops, and roads, and uprooting water pipes. And in the northeast, about 500,000 people are facing starvation due to drought in Karamoja, where hundreds of people, mostly women and children, have already died. Nakate recently traveled to neighboring Kenya with UNICEF, the UN Aid and Development Agency for Children, and its new Goodwill Ambassador, a role also held by household names like Serena Williams, Amitabh Bachchan, David Beckham, Katy Perry, Angelina Jolie was one, I think, as well. The experience in Turkana, one of the areas in the northwest Kenya most affected by a prolonged drought that has left more than 37 million people in Greater Horn of Africa on the brink of starvation, was life-changing. It hasn't rained for 2 years. To experience what that means in a community, to see how much people are suffering and how much help they need, I really got to see how the climate crisis is affecting so many lives and destroying so many livelihoods, and that it's mostly women and children who are suffering the most. Yes. Yep. And when we talk about my policies, it's not just about reparations from the global north to the global south, specifically sending them, trillions of dollars to shift to sustainable energy, but also that those trillions of dollars from the global north to the global south should also work towards ensuring that these countries who are at risk like this are shifting their agriculture to basically vertical agriculture. They need to be taking a lot of their land, creating vertical agriculture, aquaponic, aeroponic, all that sort of stuff, and using that to ensure that they have food for all their people. It's not cheap to create vertical agriculture, and the trillions that we should be sending them should be funding that to ensure that they don't have a starvation crisis. That is very, very much key to what we need to be doing in every single country in the world to help deal with the horrors of climate change, because it's going to get hotter, much like it's happening in Africa in the south, there isn't enough rain, there isn't enough water, it's too hot for a lot of the crops to grow, so we need to start growing our food indoors in vertical agriculture. In vertical agriculture, aquaponic, aeroponic, and stuff takes about a tenth the land, a tenth the water, and it's more efficient and it can grow year round. You get a lot more food out of a significantly less amount of land than you can with normal agricultural techniques. And this is basically the only way we're going to be able to grow food, using techniques like this as climate change keeps going on. I just saw an article saying that by 2030, was it 2030 or 21? I'm pretty sure it's 2030, 2050, we should be hitting a 1.5 degree increase beyond what it was prior to the Industrial Revolution. I was thinking we were just going to hit 1.3, maybe 1.4, but they're saying we're on track for 1.5, which is huge. So it's going to get a lot worse than what we're seeing now. And people dying in Africa, that's going to be an everyday occurrence. And newspapers here in the north and the mainstream media here isn't going to care because they're not white. It's the way it is. Systemic and structural racism inherent to capitalism. And it's fucking sucks. Okay. It was Nakate's first time experiencing such extreme climate suffering firsthand. At one hospital treating children with severe malnutrition, she met an emaciated little boy who died the following day. According to the World Health Organization, an estimated 7 million children under the age of 5 are acutely malnourished in the region, which has experienced the worst hunger crisis in over 70 years. I've always said that climate change is more than statistics, it's more than weather, but in Turkana, I really got to understand those words. Yes, it's people who are dying. I'm gonna go over part of my environmental policies, just to show you some of what we can be doing with this vertical farming. Because it's not just about growing food indoors, because there's going to be a circular sort of thing going on here. And let me see, evolution of farming. Yeah, vertical farming. And then you also take every single part of it, all of the byproducts of it, the waste and everything, and then you need to find a way to recycle that as well. Part of that waste recycling is growing fish, right? Because fish you can eat, then their poop, their waste feeds the plants. And then if you take that stuff, the other byproducts of the food, you can grow insects, mushrooms, algae, seaweed, and mussels, such as clams, can also clean water too. There's lots of things that you could do in a very densely packed vertical farming infrastructure that could clean the water, keep it clean, and you can end up engaging in a lot of carbon sequestration while supporting the food requirements for the local area. And that's the sort of things we need to be concentrating on right here. Insects doesn't sound like fun, but they're nutrient dense. And they are some of the bottom feeders, so that they are the bottom of the food chain. So they're insects, they're everywhere. Mushrooms too, they're recyclers, right? Those are also very nutrient dense and very, very good for you. There's that. And then as a part of this, of course, when you have these nutrient dense foods, you can combine them together to make one sort of like a meal bar, which is nutrient dense, can help solve some of the food crisis you have over there. The algae and the mushrooms and the insects, and then the hemp and maybe even the mussels and stuff like that. You've got a very nutrient dense food that can keep people from starving, and a lot of it is made from waste, especially if you include the insects as well. Everybody wins. All right. Of course, most people will never witness such catastrophe firsthand, which is why it's crucial that the voices and experiences of those most affected are amplified on the international stage through the media and at decision-making events like the UN climate talks. Yeah, and I bitched about that. I shared my link to my post talking about COP26. Like, The group that had the most number of people there was the fossil fuel industry, and this COP26 is the 26th time they've met, and it's the first time that they have been able to name any fossil fuel directly or indirectly, or even that word within one of these conferences. And India is the one who shifted the language there from was it coal to draw down, no, to shift the language from phase out to draw down, and a lot of people were really disappointed. And I can guarantee you that if Bill Gaiman, thank you so much. Appreciate the follow. Glad you found something of value here. I guarantee you that if the Global South came to one of these conferences and they weren't here to fucking play, the Global North wouldn't show up at all, because the Global South has to hold the Global North accountable for the horrors that we are going through as a globalized civilization. The United States and the Global North is not willing to throw the trillions to the Global South and to radically change our infrastructure. They're effectively voting for human extinction. And the United States, if they are not on the vanguard of the war against climate change, human extinction is what's going to happen in the next 1 to 200 years. That's just the way it is, because the United States' largest export is terrorism. That is one of the most environmentally damaging things that you can spend money on. Hans, how you doing? Welcome back. How you doing today? Talking about some climate change stuff? Oh, thank you. Don't thank me too much, because that's I was part of participating in Iraq. I think the USS Enterprise, which I was on, was responsible for the initial bombing. Not something I'm proud of, because, at least at that time I didn't know anything about politics. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's very kind of you. Very kind of you. That's something, knowing that I participated in that bombing of Iraq, that's something that I've carried with me, especially around Veterans Days and stuff like that. And when talking to my daughter about this sort of stuff too, that, it makes me very, it helps me to understand the price of ignorance. It helps me to better understand my privilege as a white male middle-class American, right? That I had, the privilege to go into the military. It wasn't really privilege. It's another part of the thing, right? We don't have free education, so I had to go risk my life to get education. So there's that part, but also, I was in the military and I was a part of something very horrible. And no one should have to go through that. And it really made me, when reflecting upon that and learning and reading about U.S. imperialism and stuff like that, that I began to really understand the United States' place within the world, and how much the United States and its imperialism is a large part of the problem that we face as a globalized civilization. Without defeating that, there's no way forward. It's only down. I don't know. I want to say we were in the Mediterranean in '96. Yeah, way back then, because I got out in '98. Yeah, something like that. 96, plus or minus, somewhere around there. Yeah, right, the very, very first one. Way back in the day. Yeah, that's what I was a part of. It was technically the Persian Gulf War, I think. That's the technical badge that I qualified for. Yeah, so, yeah, that's a thing. So yeah, with this, the Global South needs to show up and they need to come swinging. That's the only way we're going to get anything. And much like I talk about in my post here, they don't come swinging, because if they did come swinging, if the Global South came to these conferences swinging, saying, hey, where's our money? You're the ones who did this. Fix it, right? Then none of the white countries would show up to these things. They wouldn't. They basically, global south has to be there and take whatever scraps that the global north is willing to throw out, and they can't rock the boat. Otherwise, what little is being done is going to be even less than that, just out of spite, especially when it comes to the United States. And in a sense, a lot of what you're seeing here with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine and the shift of power in the geopolitics is kind of a direct byproduct of that, the U.S. imperialism and the United States not doing anything and using Ukraine as, overthrowing them in the coup and using them as proxies and sacrificing innocent people to further their aims. A lot of people are getting sick of it, and so they're starting to ally with others. Russia, China, and the United States is going to be in a slow decline in global power. All right. Last year in Glasgow, COP26, very few African activists were able to attend due to challenges with accreditation, funding, and COVID vaccinations. See, you've got right here primary examples of systemic and structural racism on the geopolitical scale. The global north ensuring the global south can't participate in stuff like this and raise any problems, which at the time were available to less than 5% of people across the continent. Pledges on loss and damage for developing nations most harmed by global heating were once again shelved at the behest of the rich polluting nations, right? See? The unequal amount of power that the global north has over these conferences it's broken. That's just the way it is. Until the global north is going to be held accountable, nothing is going to change. COP27 takes place in November this year in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, which will be Nakate's third climate talk, but getting access for most activists is proving to be just as difficult this year. And people are calling it an African COP, but it won't be an African COP if the activists are not there. So COP here means COP26, Conference of Parties. This should have been capitalized, so this is an editing issue, right? So not COP as in police officer, but Conference of Parties. Countries from across Africa and the wider global south will be looking to secure billions of dollars of climate financing for adaptation and the green energy transition, as well as separate funds for loss and damage and reparations. Right. I would be surprised if there was a real large push for that. Otherwise, the global north will just pull out of the COP altogether, and nothing, even less than is happening now will be happening then. But if they do get the opportunity to do that, I think that's going to be a good thing, and I hope it really gets televised, because the world needs, just like this article is saying, needs to hear what the global south is dealing with, and they need to, and the ignorant people in the global north need to understand how much responsible we are for climate change and how much of a victim the global south is. We may have done all the pollution, but the global south, Africa, Central South America, Middle East, right? They are the ones who are suffering the large price for the global north's pollution. So what they're saying, billions of dollars of climate financing? No, trillions. Trillions of dollars. And it shouldn't be financing, it should be reparations. Trillions of dollars in reparations for not just climate change, but also, of course, for slavery and imperialism and colonialism, all that other garbage, right? So we need to send the trillions and trillions of dollars to the global south, so they shift to sustainable energy, and so they shift their housing and their agriculture to something that can adapt and protect them from becoming climate change. That's going to be happening. And yeah, that's what it needs to be. Trillions and trillions of dollars. On the recent Kenya trip, Nakate met a young man who asked her why countries in the global north contribute the most emissions, but places like Turkana suffer the most. He thought they must have done something wrong. It was really hard to explain to him why those being impacted the most are the least responsible, and that's one of the horrible realities of the climate crisis. Right, that is privilege. That is the privilege that we white people have from the global north. We are the first ones there, first one to industrialize, first ones to, well, exploit and colonize and enslave the global south. It's the privilege of those who were there first and who had the power and the resources to do it. There are people who are looking for answers to a question that needs to be answered through much needed reparations and responsibility from the global north. 54 countries in Africa combined account for 15% of the world's population, but contribute less than 4% of global greenhouse emissions, in contrast to 23% by China, 19% by the US, and 13% from the European Union. Now, I'm fairly sure the US's numbers are much higher because I'm fairly sure that those numbers do not take into account the US military-industrial complex. The direct, the negative externalities, the direct and indirect costs of war and coups and all that sort of stuff from the US military-industrial complex. Nakate, a born-again Christian, said having dominion over the earth is about responsibility and service to the planet and its people because God is not a God of waste and exploitation. Kante was drawn to climate activism in 2018 after learning about the erratic rainfall and extreme heat affecting Ugandan farmers and food production, including members of her family. Agriculture is the backbone of the country's economy, accounting for a quarter of its GDP. About 70% of people rely on farming and raising livestock. Yeah, so subsistence farming, countries that are developing nations and relying on subsistence farming they're very strongly at risk because they're not as able to take advantage of the specialization of labor and automation and things of that nature to increase the production yields for farming or anything else. So they need to shift out of subsistence farming and into the age of industrialization. Without that, they're fucked. Every single one of them are. And that's why the global south needs the trillions to be able to do that. The global north. Inspired by Thunberg's school strikes in Sweden, Nakate launched her own climate movement and for several months in 2019 protested outside the gates of parliament against the government's inaction on the climate crisis. She then founded the Youth for Future Africa and the Africa-based Rise Up movement and is now one of the world's most celebrated youth activists. Nice. But her celebrity means that some organizations and journalists regard her as the go-to African voice, which she finds problematic. Across the continent, many activists are doing incredible work, and there were many before us in the climate strikes in 2018. When the focus is just on one person, it erases other experiences and stories. The solution is not to put faces on the climate movement. It has millions of people who are doing incredible work and organizing in their communities. In Nairobi recently, Nakate met young people making briquettes, a cheap alternative cooking fuel made from waste taken out of rivers, for a grassroots green energy company called Motorbricks, creating sustainable local jobs. It's people and stories like this we really need to listen to. Part of the issue with this is you're burning something, and burning stuff is bad, basically, is what it comes down to. But, recycling is something, it's a step, kind of. Making sure activists and impact communities from across Africa can attend and meaningfully participate in Egypt is crucial for negotiations on loss and damage and solutions. These stories aren't heard, the solutions that are being financed risk being unacceptable or even harmful to affected communities. NGOs and governments need to listen and engage with communities about what they want, what works for them, and not dump solutions on them. We need to have communities at the negotiating tables in Egypt. Yeah, I mean, ideally that's the way it would be, but ultimately it's just going to be white people have the power and their greenwashed capitalist solutions are what will be imposed upon them, which will not, be a part of saving humanity from extinction. So, there you go. Some lighthearted doomerism. Questions, comments, or suggestions on that before we move on to something equally lighthearted? Ooh. Yeah, the with the update to OBS, the captions aren't working. I want to look at that. All right, next, this is from Unfucking the Republic newsletter. BlackRock, the devil's banker. Do as I say, not as I do. This is from 11 hours ago, so this is fairly recent. What has he got? Nestle, British Petroleum, Walmart, Bayer, Fox, something else over here. Yeah, the Vanguard and BlackRock are one of the largest investment funds in the world, and we've read an article or two on this before. But let's go through this and see what they have to say. All right, so this says this isn't the hit piece you want it to be. Okay, well that's a bunch of bullshit. But don't fret, it's important to have an open and honest conversation about companies like BlackRock and others that will soon cover. We're going to sporadically populate the feed with takedowns of large institutions that have a controlling interest in our lives, whether we're aware of them or not. The companies we'll cover are true enablers of the capitalist and neoliberal model, and oftentimes, as in the case of BlackRock, unapologetically so. Yep. The ones who do the devil's bidding regardless of their intentions. BlackRock is often the subject of conspiracy theories, which makes it a titillating topic for sure. It also makes it more difficult to separate fact from fiction, even in some of the conventional coverage of the company. For example, you might have heard that BlackRock is buying up single-family homes and bidding up the prices, thus causing a housing crisis. Or that it has ties to Chinese government and is funneling US money into blacklisted Chinese investments. Or that its senior executive team is involved in a child death cult and drinking baby blood in a bid to live forever. That's always a great one. Sorry, that last one is QAnon. There we go. The bottom line is, if you're looking for a boogeyman on Wall Street, BlackRock is an easy target because it actually does have a hand or wallet in every corner of the global economy. And again, Vanguard is another one of those. There's two of the largest funds out there funding all the bad stuff. On the flip side, BlackRock found itself as a target for Republicans for being too woke by demonizing the fossil fuel industry and pushing green and socially responsible investments. Okay. Point being, as with most conspiracy theories, there's always a hint of truth or logic that drives these narratives. Doesn't take much to extrapolate some wild theories when the company in question controls a platform that moves $10 trillion throughout the global economy. Yes, $10 trillion. That is a shitload of money. To do this the right way, we'll have to debunk a few of the more salacious rumors about the company, define what BlackRock actually is, and what should concern us all. Okay, this one's gonna be this article is gonna be a long one, so get ready. Chapter 1: Bank or no bank? You decide. Is BlackRock the devil, or even the devil's bankster? Wait, is BlackRock even a bank? No, and maybe. But it makes for a catchy title. That said, BlackRock is far from innocent. A company of its size doesn't get to where it is by playing nice or being magnanimous. What I'll argue today is that its detractors are focusing on the wrong things. Okay, let's level set with a few definitions for those who don't work in the financial industry. Those of us who exist on the periphery of the global financial system, the jargon can be confusing. Like any industry, it has its own lingo, its own rhythm and rules. Because BlackRock occupies so much market and mindshare, it's helpful to understand what exactly it is. Here we go. Investment banking. An investment bank is a financial institution that primarily acts as an intermediary. It facilitates transactions such as initial public offerings, IPOs, which is when a company goes from being privately held to publicly traded. It can also act as an advisory capacity to institutions such as pension funds and other large institutions that manage large inflows of capital and investments. These companies typically make money on fees for the services they provide. One of the things that you might have heard people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren advocating for the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall, which definitely should be, This was an act passed in 1933 to separate retail banking activities from the investment banking activities. They passed this following the economic collapse in the late 20s. We'll cover retail banking in a moment, but essentially the idea was to prevent investment banks from accessing consumer deposits to use in risky investment strategies, basically prohibiting them from gambling with your money. Recall from our Clinton series that this act was repealed in Clinton's tenure to make banks more competitive in the global financial market. Right. Bill Clinton's regime did that. They repealed that. And that's one of the reasons why we had the 2008 financial collapse. Or was that one? Or was the one before that? Well, that being repealed had a large part of all that. It's still a thing. Long story short, it didn't take long for investment banks to fuck around with our money and bring the world to the brink of economic collapse. But I digress. So these are the real Wall Street cowboys, as it were. Most often people associate investment banking with companies like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and JP Morgan Chase, the big three. So BlackRock is an investment bank. No, but it owns 7% of Goldman, 6% of Morgan Stanley, 6.5% of JP Morgan Chase. Hold that thought. That's not a lot, but it's definitely a large sum. This is any institution, depository institution. This is any institution that can hold on to money. There are essentially three different types. Commercial banks, which hold corporate money and typically have retail division for consumers. Thrifts, which are basically just savings banks, and credit unions. Credit unions are distinct because they're actually member-owned rather than corporately held. So when we refer to BlackRock as a bank, it's a little misleading. BlackRock is a fiduciary, but it's not a depository institution. A key distinction that will be important in a bit. The big depositories that people are most familiar with are banks like Bank of America, Citigroup, or Wells Fargo, to name a few. So those are banks and BlackRock is not. Got it. Except that BlackRock owns 3.8% of Bank of America, 8% of Citigroup, and 4.25% of Wells Fargo. So not a bank, just an owner of banks. Makes sense. Capital investment firms. Again, these exist along a spectrum as well, but are usually distinguished by having high net worth individuals as members or shareholders. That's because the commitment of money to certain investments is typically very high and for many years. Examples are venture capital firms that invest in the early stages of private company startups. These are high risk, high return. Private equity firms invest in the companies that made it past the venture capital stage and may or may not be on their way to going public or just going through extreme growth. Then there are hedge funds, which are typically guided by a specific strategy and have the ability to leverage their investments. Private equity firms are usually looking to build wealth through growth and value by investing directly into a company and oftentimes having significant influence over management and directors. Private equity operates more like a strategic partner. Hedge funds, on the other hand, are typically in it for the short run and look to turn a quick buck, but a big buck. They are usually less regulated and take on institutional and individual money from accredited investors that know what they're getting into because as the name suggests, hedge funds typically zig when the markets zag. That's why they're used as a hedge against the norm. Big private equity funds like the ones that really move the market, firms like KKR, Blackstone, and Carlyle Group. These three companies alone hold about $1.5 trillion in equity assets across the globe. Okay, finally, so BlackRock is a hedge fund or a private equity firm or both. No, silly, but it does own 4.2% of KKR and 3.9% of Blackstone and 2.1% of Carlyle. Again, these numbers are really small, so it's still, probably hundreds of millions of dollars in each of these, or millions in dollars in each of these, but it's much smaller voting share, but a large one proportionally compared to others, I expect. Here again, we're making our point by not making our point. BlackRock isn't a bank, but it owns the biggest ones, small percentage. Not an investment bank, it just owns them, small percentage. And it's not in private equity or venture capital, but it owns a chunk of the biggest players in this field as well. So what do we call this not bank that isn't a private equity venture hedge fund retail depository investment banking firm? Glad you asked. All right, so BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager. Simply put, asset managers manage money on behalf of individuals or institutions and invest them in vehicles that hold the promise of growth in value. Stocks, bonds, insurance products, etc. Along the spectrum of asset managers, there are different roles with different levels of responsibility, like brokers, people or companies that simply place trades as an intermediary but have no fiduciary responsibility. A fiduciary, by the way, is a person or company that is required to put its clients' interests ahead of its own by law. So what's fascinating about its position as an asset management company is that BlackRock is a public company, owned by many of the firms that they hold positions in to produce their returns that go back into the pockets of the shareholders, which are also their investors. Get it? Quite the circular flow of money. What I'm driving at is that conflicts of interest abound in the world of BlackRock. But before we get there, it's worth exploring how a company that started as a division within another firm 34 years ago was bought out 28 years ago, became the largest asset management company in the world when it only went public in 1999. All right. Chapter 2, Birth of a Giant. Larry Fink was having a bad day, a terrible one in fact. The darling of First Boston became a victim of his own design when his division at the company lost $100 million in one quarter in 1988. That must have been the part of the web boom, web bust thing. The son of a shoe salesman who is credited alongside Louis Ranieri for inventing the mortgage-backed security and built a multi-billion-dollar portfolio with MBS at the core, had underestimated the risk profile of his holdings. Never mind that it was a fraction of what he had gained for the firm, or that the portfolio would recalibrate and go on to be an unparalleled success until the eventual collapse of the housing market. Larry Fink was kicked aside and left for dead. But as the saying goes, you can't keep a good man down. Salvation lay only a few months away when a man named Steve Schwarzman came calling. Schwarzman was himself a lion in the jungle and was looking to diversify the offerings of his company. That company was Blackstone. You mean BlackRock? No, I mean Blackstone. As I was saying, Steve Schwarzman was and is an icon on Wall Street in his own right. In their book, King of Capital, by David Carey and John E. Morris, they detail the rise, fall, and rise again of Schwarzman and his plucky band of Wall Streeteers who founded Blackstone. Blackstone was fairly original at the time, coming off the heels of blow-ups at leveraged buyout firms and the cutthroat nature of exploitive investing. Schwarzman sought to create a different animal by picking the best, most profitable parts of other businesses. He focused first on advisory services, basically consulting on mergers and acquisitions, a highly profitable area because it requires no capital, just smarts. While it was slow going, in the beginning, he cultivated a solid reputation, and that part of the business began to grow and fund their other interests. Private equity was among those interests and is primarily what Blackstone is known for today. Another was asset management, and that's where our protagonist, Larry Fink, rejoins the story. As Carey and Morris write, in February 1988, Blackstone corralled Lawrence Fink, a pioneering financier and salesman. He was considered the second leading figure after Salomon Brothers' Louis Ranieri in the development of the mortgage-backed bond market. At the time, Fink was about to lose his job at First Boston after his unit racked up $100 million in losses in early 1988. But Schwarzman and Pete Peterson had from the start hopes to launch affiliated investment businesses and thought Fink was the ideal choice to head a new group focused on fixed income. Music's too loud. Okay, good. Thanks for letting me know. Is that better? I've turned it down. It's louder for me. And then probably, is that better? Hopefully it's better. Turn it down to about half of what it was before. Maybe? Okay, a little bit more? A little bit more. All right, let's see how that goes. Fink went up. It's intense. Yeah, this more pop rocky one is a bit louder and a bit more intense than the other stuff. I'm probably gonna take that out of the playlist just because of that at some point. Probably sooner than later. Fink went about building a considerable asset base within Blackstone. Forgotten was the $100 million loss at First Boston, but new troubles were on the horizon for Fink. Schwarzman and Fink were similarly built in terms of competitiveness, and the two would eventually look to part company. It's not one of those famous Wall Street fallout stories, but it became evident that the company wasn't big enough for both men. Okay, good. Excellent. Thanks for letting me know. So in 1994, Blackstone split off its asset management division, BlackRock, and sold it to PNC Bank for $240 million. It was a decent chunk of change, and Fink's BlackRock was managing more than $23 billion in assets at the time. Just 5 short years later, BlackRock would again be spun out, but this time completely on its own through an IPO. Few could have imagined just how far Fink would go in building the base of assets, however, especially Schwarzman. Let me go ahead and save. Okay. As Carrie Morris writes, BlackRock went on to surpass Fink's hideous dreams. Over the next dozen years, it grew into an investment empire comprising $1.2 trillion of assets. Mostly fixed income and real estate securities, reshuffled its ownership and went public in 2006. By 2010, BlackRock was the world's biggest publicly traded money manager, twice as big as its nearest rival. In 2008, there was a financial crisis looming, and the incoming Obama administration wound up pulling Fink aside inside the most delicate conversation to see how the Wall Street scion, once cast aside for improperly assessing the risk of his portfolio, could help assess the riskiest assets on Wall Street. There, among the biggest names in finance and government, was the son of a shoe salesman, Larry Fink, who was able to maintain a remarkably low profile thus far considering the rapid ascension of his firm. A Vanity Fair article from 2010 was one of the first real public outings of Fink as a master of the universe. Prior to this, he was extremely well known on Wall Street, but hardly part of the high society social scene or a household name by any stretch. That was all about to change during the financial crisis, as the article notes. At the height of the disaster, when the American economy was on the brink, it was to Fink that Wall Street CEOs, including JP Morgan Chase's Jamie Dimon, Morgan Stanley's John Mack, and AIG's Robert Willemstad, turned for help and counsel, as did the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, whose top officials turned to Fink for advice on the financial markets and assistance on the $30 billion financing of the sale of Bear Stearns to JP Morgan, the $180 billion bailout of AIG, the $45 billion rescue of Citigroup, and those of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac at $112 billion and growing. The bank bailout, good stuff. And yeah, that was under Obama's watch, right? And that was one of the largest transfers of wealth to the 1%. The reason Fink was the go-to man at the time went beyond just his personal acumen. Fink had another secret. A technology solution launched in 1999, the same year BlackRock went public, that the firm had been refining each and every year. A risk assessment platform named Aladdin. Aladdin, broadly, is a technology platform that assesses portfolio risk based upon its assets and multiple exposure inputs. As a recent Financial Times article notes, today it acts as the central nervous system for many of the largest players in the investment management industry and, as the Financial Times has discovered, for several huge non-financial companies. This latter point is an important distinction. We live in an era of conglomerates and behemoths, and some of these, such as Apple, Google, and several sovereign wealth and pension funds, rely on Aladdin to manage their risk profile and balance their portfolios. Again, from the Financial Times. Today, 21.6 trillion sits on the platform from just a third of its 240 clients, according to the public documents verified with the companies and first-hand accounts. That figure alone is equivalent to 10% of global stocks and bonds. That's just insane under one platform. This platform adds a crucial element of diversification to BlackRock's holdings. No longer is it simply an asset manager, it's a tech company. Not only does BlackRock manage the flow of trillions in investments into ETFs, electronically traded funds, which stands for exchange traded funds, not electronic. Essentially large pools of capital that invest into sectors of the economy, certain indices or markets. It also provides the risk assessment tools for competitors and clients alike. Given the sheer size of its influence over the global financial system, it would make sense that BlackRock would come under an intense level of scrutiny, but the opposite is true. Because it kind of falls under the too big to fail sort of a thing. Plus, they have the money and the influence to get lobbyists in there to make sure that they're not looked at too closely. And so that they can pay the lawyers and stuff to write the bills and hand them over to Congress for them to pass. During the negotiations in the financial crisis, policymakers attempted to rein in the influence of financial institutions that were too big to fail, but Larry Fink was behind closed doors in the White House, right, when these decisions were being made. Because BlackRock wasn't considered a fiduciary, meaning they only interact with funds as they pass through their system, don't actually hold on to account funds, it was determined to be exempt from such scrutiny. Of course it was. Financial Times highlights some of the risk associated with this decision to allow BlackRock to operate outside such regulatory purview. Aladdin's sprawling influence has prompted fears that it, or BlackRock, could act as a choke point if it either faced a shock, a cyber attack, a rogue line of code, or a sudden crisis for the company, destabilizing the financial system. Yeah, exactly. One company holding that much influence. Yeah, that's true. That is true. Moreover, because it operates as a black box of sorts, BlackRock operates somewhat on the honor system that it will provide honest assessment of the that it will provide honest assessments of the market, certain indicators, or even understand the opaque decisions being made by algorithms on the other side of its tools. Now consider the layers of conflict that exist. Take Apple, for example. BlackRock is one of the major owners of Apple through its ETFs, as well as direct investments it maintains on its balance sheet. As such, it has a significant say in the boardroom. Apple is also a customer of Aladdin. Myriad investment firms purchase shares of Apple through BlackRock or independently while using Aladdin to determine the level of risk. Now insert literally thousands of the world's largest companies, pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds for Apple, and a troubling pattern emerges. Chapter 3. Just how big is BlackRock? Money. Let's start with their own words. Here's an excerpt from their 2021 annual report. We went from serving a handful of clients in one country to thousands of clients in more than 100 countries. Our employees have grown from 8 to 18,400. And since our IPO in 1999, we've generated a total return of more than 9,000% for our shareholders, well in excess of broader markets. We generated $540 billion of net flows in 2021, representing a record 11% organic base fee growth. Importantly, our growth was more diversified than ever before. Our active platform, including alternatives, contributed $267 billion of net inflows, representing nearly half of total net inflows. ETFs remained a significant growth driver with record net inflows of $306 billion, and our technology services revenue grew by 12%, reaching $1.3 billion. Once again, we need to distinguish between money that flows through their platforms and the revenue they generate on fees associated with the revenue. There's a tendency to generally quote the $10 trillion figure that flows through BlackRock, or $21 trillion that touches Aladdin. Don't get me wrong, these are staggering sums, but that's not revenue. Correct. But that's the amount of effect that they have on global markets. Much like they were talking about earlier, if one thing within their platform goes wrong, that could be devastating to global financial systems. Staggering. The revenue for 2021 was an impressive $19 billion. What's even more impressive to me is its efficiency. On the $19 billion in revenue in 2021, it posted a $7.4 billion operating profit, which is upwards of 38%. BlackRock is a fucking ATM. Yeah, the profit margin is ginormous. 38%. Now back to the money it controls and the flows of influences. With $10 trillion in assets under its control, BlackRock is the largest asset manager in the world. That's more than the gross domestic product of every single country with the exception of the United States and China. BlackRock, Vanguard, and UBS, the top three money managers, cast more than 25% of votes at corporate shareholder meetings. That right there is the problem. The amount of influence that they have over global businesses, global governments, actually. A lot of people that are on these boards are on the boards of all three of these companies, not just one or the other, and then they get on the commissions and seats of power within the various large governments just to make sure that their their profit margins stay good. Influence. To get a sense of its power, BlackRock has hired dozens of former government officials. Obvious, right? At one point, the count was at 84, effectively giving it immeasurable influence over public policy. Perhaps not surprising to anyone familiar with the revolving door between the government and corporations, the Biden administration has tapped several former and current BlackRock employees for influential economic roles, including none other than BlackRock's co-founder and CEO, Larry Fink. See? Former BlackRock investment executive Brian Deese leads Biden's National Economic Council, effectively serving as his top advisor on economic matters. Biden also tapped Adewale Adeyemo, a former chief of staff to BlackRock, chief executive and longtime Democrat Larry Fink, to serve as a top official at the Treasury Department. Meanwhile, Michael Pyle, BlackRock's former global chief investment strategist who had worked in the Obama administration before joining the firm, serves as chief economic advisor to Vice President intersectional imperialist Kamala Harris. Company, this is a quote here. From Bloomberg, the company is now seen as one of Wall Street's key conduits to the power center in Washington, a tag that was more closely associated with Goldman Sachs Group, Inc. through prior administrations, like the Clinton administration. They outflanked Goldman Sachs. Now that's saying something. As for the employment of former government officials, here's what we know. Many of the ex-public officials served as regulators and central bank officials. One of the likely reasons for doing this, although they won't admit it, is to ward off regulations. According to the Wall Street Journal, in 2014, BlackRock executives obtained a copy of a confidential Federal Reserve PowerPoint presentation that argued part of the giant money manager could pose the same financial system risk as big banks. Yes, of course. BlackRock was particularly concerned about two slides that read, if it looks like a bank, quacks like a bank, it must be okay. Okay, good. That set off an aggressive campaign by BlackRock to kill any potential regulations at all costs. As the Journal reported, the presentation, which BlackRock told members of Congress contained wrong information, galvanized the firm around a crusade to elude more aggressive oversight from the Fed. BlackRock was historically non-existent on the lobbying scene, as the aforementioned journal article lays out, but things changed around the time of the Great Recession when the government had no choice but to institute a regulatory regime, the most notable being the Dodd-Frank Act, which was good, which was neutered by the Republicans in 2018. Yep. According to Open Secrets, a nonprofit that tracked corporate donations and lobbying efforts, BlackRock spent less than $200,000 on lobbying in 2004, employed only a pair of lobbyists. In 2009, its lobbying budget more than doubled compared to 7 years earlier, and it began to assemble a larger pipeline of lobbyists. By 2011, BlackRock was spending about $2.5 million on lobbying. Behemoth asset manager did not take kindly to comparisons, liking it to big banks, especially in the context of regulations. In 2013, the Wall Street Journal reported that BlackRock and similar companies were, quote, alarmed by a report from the Treasury Department's Office of Financial Research that read, in part, quote, some activities highlighted in this report that could create vulnerabilities if improperly managed or accompanied by the use of leverage, liquidity, transformation, or funding mismatches include risk-taking in separate accounts and reinvestment of cash collateral from securities lending. The government came calling again during another crisis, this time being the pandemic. After being enlisted by the Fed to prop up the corporate bond markets 2 years ago, the financial law expert William Birdthistle referred to BlackRock as the fourth branch of government. Yeah, if you hold the money, you hold the power, right? He who has the gold makes the rules. From Aladdin. Chapter 4. The ESG Hullabaloo. One of the 2 times we've referenced BlackRock's on Unfucking the Republic was in our Problem with Conscious Capitalism episode. In that show, we were highlighting the rampant greenwashing on Wall Street with firms claiming environmental, social, and governance initiatives, ESG. Essentially calling bullshit on the trend of large companies that do bad things to society and the environment, but spend their way to absolution through programs like carbon offsets, energy efficiency, and charitable donations. Right, and this is carbon capture, carbon offsets, these don't do jack shit. Energy efficiency is useful, donations don't solve the pollution problem. Here's what we said. Let's look at BlackRock. Huge firm, top of the top. They too have an ESG fund. Let's see. Performance, key facts. Yes, top 10 holdings. Got Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Facebook, Alphabet Class C, JP Morgan Chase, Tesla, Nvidia, and Johnson & Johnson. Tech companies and a bank or two. Bank in there, right? Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, which owns Google, Facebook, Alphabet Class C. I think this is a subsidiary or a part of Google's owner, parent, Alphabet, a bank here, of course, Tesla, Nvidia, and Johnson & Johnson is an outlier there. Yes, I do know it's incredibly gauche to quote oneself, but I'm just trying to point out that I'm consistent if nothing else. Anyway, here's what BlackRock itself had to say about its ESG efforts. Quote, environmental and social and governance investing is about investing in progress and recognizing that companies solving the world's biggest challenges can be best positioned to grow. It's about pioneering better ways of doing business and creating the momentum to encourage more people to opt into a future we're working to create. Okay, so we've covered a little bit of this on this channel. Specifically, my God, a few years ago, Gaming Mind shared this fucking video, which got me filled with rage, right? It was talking about how Microsoft and Google were using their AI to help fossil fuel industries to get better oil and stuff like that. That's what they're doing. They're not working with sustainable energy. They're not using their AI and their algorithms to help make sure that solar panels or wind farms or tidal or anything like that is becoming more efficient and is a better value. Tesla's, they're doing some good research and good stuff going on, but if Tesla gave a flying fuck about solving some of our problems, they wouldn't be investing in cars, they would be investing in trains and mass transportation of that sort that really mattered, that would really greatly be more efficient and pull a lot of cars and stuff off the streets. That's what they should be doing. They should be doing mass transportation using the Boring Company, not to create fucking holes so that their Teslas can go through super fucking slow. They should be using the Boring Company to create mass transportation. Anyhow, that's Tesla. So yeah, none of these companies are actually helping humanity to stave off extinction. It's all about profits. Our investment conviction, and if you want a link to that video, that is in my environmental page. You can check it out there. You could be pissed too. Good stuff. Our investment conviction is that climate risk is investment risk, and that integrating climate and sustainability considerations into investment process can help investors build more resilient portfolios and achieve better long-term risk-adjusted returns. Okay, that is true, but that's not what they're doing. We believe that society is on the cusp of transformational change towards sustainability. Companies, investors, and governments must prepare for a significant reallocation of capital. BlackRock's sustainability strategy focuses on two structural themes driving this change: transition finance and stakeholder capitalism. Well, if you're funding anything that has capitalism in it, you're part of the problem. Here's where it gets a little tricky, and we find some strange bedfellows. The dark money group Consumers Research is running ads against corporations that perform what it calls woke capitalism. Yep, grievance-obsessed, culture war evangelists, Republicans are coming after capitalism. Welcome to the party, or maybe not. Woke capitalism is just... Okay, let's see what they have to say about this. Consumers Research is specifically targeting BlackRock for purportedly betraying their clients by calling for divestment in fossil fuels and other ESG activities in a so-called consumer warning release in August. The group inexplicably blamed BlackRock and its CEO Larry Fink for rising energy prices. Oh yeah, so just the mindless, brainless bleeding of mindless Republicans. Okay, well, I mean, sure. I know, woke capitalism, right? That's just. If you say capitalism, there's nothing woke about it, right? Yeah, these people, their complete ignorance of the actual issues. It's pretty it's sad and also terrifyingly entertaining, I guess. Using trillions in investors' money, CEO Larry Fink waged war on America's energy companies, pushing progressive climate agenda that has crippled U.S. energy production and left consumers with a hefty bill. Yeah, this is patently incorrect, right? Oh, thanks. It's from Stream Beats by Harris Heller. Look for Stream Beats. It's Harris Heller and Senpai Gaming. He dumped a lot of money into basically starting up a record company just to create stuff for streamers. So yeah, you can get access to it too. Senpai Gaming, S-E-N. Here, let me. Or actually, no, Stream Beats. Let me just Stream Beats Harris Heller. There you go. Yeah, they got a lot of stuff here. You can check it out there. I worried about the music issue, and that's, yeah, I've been following him for a long time through his, it was Alpha Gaming first on YouTube. They recently rebranded to Senpai Gaming. They got lots of streaming advice there, and then he created this as well to make sure streamers don't get, DMCA stuff going on. I'm glad you like it. Glad you noticed. Awesome. So yes, with this, right, I was gonna ask you to turn down the music on the last song. The singer really, yeah, and that's Girly Bear. That's kind of what I was afraid of. I like that the music that they made for that, but I worried exactly that the singing is what would interfere with it. So I'll spend the time and I'll rip those songs out. There's only like 2 or 3 of them. Music socialism, yeah, that's really it. I mean, he makes a shitload of money off it, but it's, just advertising on Spotify and stuff like that. That's where he makes a crap load of money off it. That just keeps funding it, and it keeps getting bigger and more music. Yeah, it's pretty cool. He's pretty cool. He's doing that for the community and stuff like that. It's available for free, people to use, and yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, if you guys want me to yank some songs out, let me know, and I will definitely do that. I will look at that. I'll look at that probably over the next week or two, because I need to pull those out. Thanks for letting me know. It's very important. So yes, here. So, Republicans blaming BlackRock for woke capitalism isn't why energy prices are going up, right? It's crisis profiteering, right? If fossil fuel industry is making record profits, it's making your brain struggle. Yeah, there's a lot of technical stuff going on in here, but it helps to kind of get our brain around who they are and what they do. Even if you get just a little bit out of this is a lot longer than I expected it was going to be, but it's got good information in it. So, yeah, the fossil fuel industry is making record profits, so the actual price increases aren't about supply or demand. It's all about crisis profiteering. It's the fossil fuel industry is seeing a moment where they can't feel like they can increase prices and make a shitload of money, and then they do it, and there isn't anything anyone can do about it because they think, oh, there's supply and demand issues going on here, when that's not the case. All right, the anti-ESG culture war comes as more than a dozen GOP states claim BlackRock is violating its fiduciary responsibility. Okay, now as they said before, BlackRock is an asset manager and does not have a fiduciary responsibility. Now, fiduciary responsibility means that they have to act in their clients' best interest. BlackRock doesn't have that. 2 states, Texas and West Virginia, have effectively banned BlackRock and other ESG companies from doing business with them. Oh, that's interesting. West Virginia's ban includes 5 firms, including BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase. This is particularly hilarious considering that JP Morgan Chase continues to be the largest financier of fossil fuels out of any major bank in the world, to the tune of more than $380 billion between 2016 and 2021. Okay. Well, they indirectly got something right. They're one of the largest funders of fossil fuels, and giving them the boot because of that, sure, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, on occasion, they'll get something right. As for our friends at BlackRock, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, a nonprofit newsroom, reported on a meeting BlackRock executives had with Texas's oil and gas regulator. That's ERCOT, right? Oh, it's not the oil and gas regulator. It's that ERCOT is their energy regulator. Amid criticism of its ESG efforts, here's what the outlet reported. In January, BlackRock sent a team of senior staff, including Dahlia Blas, its head of external affairs, to meet Wayne Christian, a former Republican legislator who has chaired the state. Something beeped at me. Not sure what beeped at me. Oh, it's probably this turning off. Who's chaired the state's oil and gas regulator since 2016. In his follow-up email to Blas, Christian noted the BlackRock team had said their environmental, social, and governance initiatives had been misrepresented by the media, and that the company was supportive of the oil and gas industry. It merely offers ESG energy-related investments because of client demand. He questioned BlackRock on the contradictions between these reassurances and its public stance on climate issues. Okay, this is just kind of crazy. Of course, they're much like Democrats, right? During the advertising, they're going to say, "Hey, we're all environmentally friendly," but when they're actually talking with the bad people, fossil fuel industry, you know that they're definitely funding them. Glass had already written to Texas officials to highlight BlackRock's support for the fossil fuel industry. "We are perhaps the world's largest investor in fossil fuel companies," she wrote. "We want to see these companies succeed and prosper." Among the most outspoken opponents of ESGs is none other than Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, because fuck that guy. The unofficial spokesperson for the GOP's culture war army. DeSantis was responsible for the Florida State Board of Administrators' decision earlier this summer to prohibit the furtherance of social, political, or ideological interests in investment policy matters. This might also be targeting BDS movements too. That makes no sense. This is so ridiculous. People, in other words, if you have an opinion, you can't invest based off that opinion. Here's what DeSantis had to say after his proposal was adopted. With the resolution we passed today, the tax dollars and proxy votes of the people of Florida will no longer be commandeered by Wall Street financial firms and used to implement policies through the boardroom that Floridians rejected at the ballot box. Let's just say we're not buying Ron's war on Wall Street. Why? Let's take a look at his campaign contributions. From Politico. Top Wall Street executives are pouring tens of millions of dollars into the Florida Republicans' upcoming re-election campaign, the outlet reported in August. Wall Street is obviously hedging its bets in the event DeSantis becomes the MAGA heir apparent if his political mentor from afar, maybe soon to be indicted Donald Trump, decides not to run, which is unlikely given his, well, Trump. As with so many idiotic culture war clashes that bleed into the political discourse, ESGs have become the new way for officials on both sides to prove their ideological bona fides. Apparently owning the libs on climate is more important than this era's brand of Republican politics than the free market principles they've for so long fetishized. Yeah, how can you be for the free market if you're against people voting with their dollars, right? That's it's not quite so free. As you mentioned, more than a dozen states have moved to erase corporate ESG policies. Democrats, on the other hand, have been bullish on the idea of having pension systems divest from fossil fuels. You know, because Democrats are Republicans, moderate Republicans. With Maine's state legislature becoming the first to do that with its move in 2021 to divest $1.3 billion in such investment over 5 years. That would be, yeah, this is huge. Yeah, states definitely need to do that. Start divesting from fossil fuels and start investing in sustainable energy stuff. Take this with a grain of salt, perhaps, but a Morgan Stanley white paper published in 2019 found no financial trade-off when embracing ESGs. Morgan Stanley compared sustainable funds, or ESGs, to tradable funds from 2004 to 2018, 10,723 in total. Right, and exactly like bullish. Good question. All right, let's. Okay, bullish in the market. I think. Oh, okay. Characterized by rising share prices. So if they were bullish on the market, they're thinking prices are going to go up. Let's go back to that. Let's see if I can find it. Sorry, I missed that. Here we go. So, Democrats, on the other hand, have been bullish on the idea of having pension systems divest from fossil fuels. Yeah, that doesn't. Hold on. That doesn't make sense in this. Let's try it again. Okay. Hopeful or confident that something or someone will be successful. Okay, so let's. Yeah, that doesn't make much sense here. So for me, they have been bullish on the idea of having pension systems divest from fossil fuels. So here, to me, it means that they didn't like the idea of divestment, right? Because that's, their thing, because they're pro-fossil fuels. Or no, hold on. No. So let's take a look at the whole thing in context, right? Democrats have been bullish on the idea of having pension systems divest, and then Maine's state legislature becoming the first to do that. So it looks like in this context, yeah, it's right here. Hopeful or confident that something or someone will be successful. So yeah, bullish in here is that they liking the idea, and so some are starting to do that, like they're talking about here with Maine's state legislature. So Democrats, on the other hand, have been liking the idea of having pension systems divest from fossil fuels. So in this case, liking is probably a good synonym for bullish. Yeah, good question. Very good question. I wasn't. I completely misinterpreted the sentence because I didn't understand what bullish meant in this context. So yeah, thank you for asking. I appreciate that. Take this with a grain of salt, perhaps, but Morgan Stanley white paper published in. Okay, we already read that one. So Morgan Stanley said there's basically no financial trade-off to investing in ESGs over traditional stuff. And Arabist Africanist. Fortune 500 companies got so greedy during COVID and pumped Wall Street numbers all for nothing because of the current. Yeah, there ends up being some sort of a trade-off going on. Sure, they made record profits, but energy prices go up, so then their profits go down. Yeah, well, fuck them. So with this, right, there's no trade-off between ESGs and normal, where is it? Or traditional funds. It's like the ESGs, like we pointed out before. It's Google, Facebook, Nvidia, Johnson & Johnson. There's a bank in there, right? And other things which are, quote, part of their ESG funds, but they're not really funds which are very, how's the Green Revolution working out in Europe, right? Well, there are some countries which are doing very well. Like there's one country that's close to meeting the Paris Climate Agreement, right? Like, it's one of the Nordic countries, right? Some of those countries are doing very well. Yes, $1 US equals €1. It used to be that the euro was much stronger. And I think a lot of that problem is because of the European Union itself. These countries have lost access to their own currency. That greatly reduces their power, their ability to be flexible and deal with things like this and invest. Now they have one central bank for the entire EU, much like the United States is. They're very much sitting in the same kind of shithole that the United States is. We have one central bank for every single state, much like the EU has one central bank for all of their member states, right? And that has a negative. The retards have truly shot themselves in the foot. With sanctions, yeah, that is part of it too, definitely. With Russia and stuff jumping onto the U.S. bandwagon because the U.S. controls geopolitics in that area, especially when it comes to Europe, white people sticking together and all that stuff. They are, but they don't have to be. Like Europe is shifting, Germany. Yeah, that's exactly. The United States is very much a part of that. Biden is saying, hey, we're the most, we've passed the largest and most progressive climate deal ever, and yet they're drilling more than they have before, right? And Europe is doing some of that too. A lot of the European countries, some of the European countries are very much going into the Green Revolution and doing amazing things, but some of them are still drill baby drill, right? And that is such a huge problem. And that's something that they could deal with as the EU as an entirety by printing that money and dumping it all into sustainable energy and start increasing taxes on all of these fossil fuel industries. And some of the countries have been doing stuff like that, but they need to be much more aggressive with it. Green energy is not a joke. The European EU, there's going to be a whole lot of actual freezing there because they're the winters are getting more mild, right? And a lot of these countries they're very interconnected and they have a lot of sustainable energy there. They may have some issues because of these sanctions, right? But I'm hoping that they'll get their shit together. It's gonna be an interesting winter to see how it's all gonna turn out. Yeah, we'll see how all these the sanctions are working against Russia, and see where that balance of power lays during the winter between China and Russia and Africa, and the energy there, with that all being divided with the global West. Okay. We found that sustainable funds provided returns in line with comparable traditional funds while reducing downside risk. What's more, during a period of extreme volatility, we saw strong statistical evidence that sustainable funds are more stable. Incorporating environmental, social, and governance criteria into investment portfolios may help limit market risk. Okay. Ludius, how you doing, man? Good to hear from you. I have solar panels on my house, paid off my car and my 30-year mortgage in 14 years from the savings. So your comment is farcical. Yeah, I mean, green energy is what we need to be doing. If you're Skeeter, you're probably new to this channel, at least somewhat. I'm very much into sustainable energy. We cover a lot of sustainable energy and technology here. It's super important. Without sustainable energy, we are fucked. Full stop. Oh, fracking. Yeah. Oh my God, dude. If fracking, God, it pisses me off. Like within geothermal energy, there's ESG, which involves fracking, and I'm very much against fracking or anything like that. Now with ESG geothermal, they don't have chemicals and stuff. They use water to put it in and to fracture the earth so they get access to more of the heat. But that, of course, has very similar issues to standard fracking in that it creates the potential for more earthquakes and stuff like that. So standard, like closed loop, or what's it called, binary or closed loop geothermal is what we need to do, not ESG. Yeah, fuck fracking. Every single person that was involved with the promotion of fracking, including the Bush organization, needs to have all their asses put in jail. Every single fucking one of them, because they're murdering so many people, poisoning our water. People are getting cancer off it. It's really pisses me off. So what they're saying here is that, quote, ESG funds can help limit risk and limit market risk. Okay. Its analysis also found, and if you want to learn more about how I stand on energy, there's a lot here. We need to be concentrating on Jesus Christ. Tidal wave and ocean for baseload power, as well as geothermal, altitude wind, and if you want to get really fancy, you can get into power satellites. Basically, satellites in space that have solar panels, and you beam it to the Earth. It's a good way of doing it, but I do worry about the beaming of energy to here to Earth, at least. Using power satellites in space to beam energy places makes perfect sense. I'm a little bit iffy on beaming it here. So yeah, if you want to see that sort of stuff, when I talk about energy, it's all in there. All right, its analysis also found sustainable funds to be less risky, noting, quote, sustainable funds experience 20% smaller downside deviation than traditional funds. This was a consistent and statistically significant finding. Okay, so if sustainable funds had 20% less negative changes than other funds. Okay, that makes sense because that's what we need. ESG funds have steadily gained in popularity over time. Between 2004 and 2018, sustainable funds grew 144%. According to Morgan Stanley, to believe the GOP's line of thinking, so-called woke investing, would have existed well before the term was bastardized by Republicans and well before the Paris Agreement in 2016. That they lead with Paris as a jumping off point for such investment decisions is belied by the data. Whether money managers like BlackRock are committed to such ideals is another matter entirely. Yeah, they don't care about the environmental, the sustainable energy, advancing sustainable energy or the environmental changes. All they care about is the profit. Now, since I'm dumping a crap load of money into my retirement fund, I really do want to find an actual fund of some sort that is actually putting money into sustainable energy, not in the way that these ESG things they're doing, but one that is actually investing in real sustainable energy. Not for show, but for real. I haven't had time to go look at that, but at some point I need to find something to dump a bunch of money into. All right, BlackRock and its founder present an interesting conundrum in the world of finance and frankly in our daily lives. As Wall Street titans go, he's pretty conscientious, but the fact that he's in the position of emperor where finance is concerned is problematic in and of itself. And I'll get there in a second, but first, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, it's important to distinguish between conspiracy and reality. The first big conspiracy surrounding BlackRock in progressive circles is that it has somehow contributed to the housing crisis. Perhaps a case can be made indirectly, but in terms of deliberate attempts to direct investments, this theory doesn't hold water. First off, there's a small case of mistaken identity that can be found in the trove of faux online documents that attempt to draw a straight line between BlackRock and the purchase of single-family homes during the housing crisis. That's Blackstone. Okay, yes, Blackstone. The private equity firm that birthed BlackRock, and only marginally so. Yeah, even my brain can't keep these guys. They're both bad in either case. Black something. There's a stone and a rock. Same thing, just different. In fact, BlackRock even has an entire page on its website dedicated to dispelling this myth. Obviously, we're not going to take corporate propaganda at face value, right? Pouring through their filings and looking at real reporting on the matter reveals something closer to the truth. The Atlantic took great pains to clear up the confusion and point to housing regulation and other investment firms as the real culprits, saying, the U.S. has roughly 140 million housing units, a broad category that includes mansions, tiny townhouses, and apartments of all sizes. Of those 140 million units, about 80 million are standalone single-family homes, about 2/3. Of those 80 million, about 50 million are rental properties. Okay. Of those 15 million single-family rentals, institutional investors own about 300,000. Most of the rest are owned by individual landlords. Of that 300,000, the real estate rental company Invitation Homes, in which BlackRock is an investor, owns about 80,000. To clear up a common confusion, the investment firm Blackstone, not BlackRock, established Invitation Homes. Don't yell at me, I didn't name them. Right? Fair. Okay, so BlackRock. Okay, Blackstone owns about 80,000 of the 300,000. No. Yes, so Blackstone owns Invitation Homes, which owns 80,000 of the 300,000 owned homes that are owned by institutional investors. That's what they're saying. Okay. Another popular story is that BlackRock is a backdoor to Chinese government control of U.S. companies and Wall Street. I haven't heard this one. This one's new to me, so let's see what they have to say. Again, this is a little dubious, but there's a kernel of truth. BlackRock was one of the few firms that was able to negotiate a waiver to invest in a Chinese conglomerate. Unusual? Yes. Devious? Not as much as detractors would like it to be. They're taking all the fun out of this. But there are areas that should raise some red flags. For example, the other time we referenced BlackRock on UNFTR, I don't know what that is. And that's with respect to the student debt. Recall that we covered the evil. We covered the evil that is Sallie Mae. When we pulled Sallie Mae's proxy report, we found that none other than BlackRock owned an 8.3% stake in the company. This reveals a different disturbing pattern outside of BlackRock's outsized influence over politicians, regulators, competitors, megacorporations, pension funds, and nations, and that its strategy is profiting from misery. The examples are everywhere. Yeah, so you've got a company that is this large and that has its fingers into so many different industries. They will end up utilizing their lobbyists to ensure that basically all the industries that they are a part of don't have regulation, or they'll try and pare back the regulation or prevent the regulation just so that they can profit from it, right? capitalism is all about exploitation and maximizing the profit no matter the cost to humanity and the environment, right? And as a note, with my 8 philosophical pillars for peace, I'm doing some editing on this. I'm actually going to end up probably expanding this. I'll just bring this up really quick. I might end up expanding this from 8 to 12, but I'm still kind of messing with it. Some of this I've been toying with for a while now. So interdependence, humanity, the natural world are the top 3. That's staying the same, and then sustainability, education, equity, justice and compassion, and science and technology. So that's why you can't get rid of student loans in bankruptcy. Right, that's part of it. Who signed that? That was Biden. Biden is the one who created the, he was master, or one of the guys who was very much behind it, and is the one who pushed to make sure you can't get rid of it. Yeah, that's exactly right. That is exactly right, Girly Bear. That's, yeah, fuck Biden, fuck Obama, fuck everyone in the U.S. federal government, especially the presidents and vice presidents, because they are horrible, horrible human beings. Especially Biden, especially Obama. Put those fuckers in jail. There's lots of reasons for it, and that's one of them. So currently, I'm having all this stay the same, but I'll end up shifting sustainability to regenerative, and then I'll have sustainability kind of as the fallback for regenerative. And then when I talk about this part, I also talk about the cosmic. So humanity's interdependence with itself, with the natural world, and also when we talk about how all of the world's problems can be talked about as an individual separation from the self or the natural world or the cosmic. I'm going to be adding that, I think, into this as part of that conversation, because this has a much larger part of the conversation of the philosophical pillars of society. It's not just about that separation from the cosmic, which for me tends to be the hard sciences, or an ignorance of hard sciences, but it's also, we bring in the cosmic or cosmos as a part of humanity as an interstellar species. Then it'll probably be change, entropy, what was the other one? Okay, oh, and transparency. Change, entropy, and transparency will be the other ones, as well as the cosmic. Those are the things I'll probably be adding to this, and eventually get this updated. Okay. Yes, okay. Like major stakes in conservative media outlets, yes, even the outlets hedging their bets on a DeSantis future have to tread lightly around Fink, who often appears as a guest on business shows. BlackRock owns a 7.5% share in Sinclair Broadcasting, one of the worst examples of right-wing broadcast media. It owns 12.4% of Fox Corporation. Ugh. But it doesn't end with just conservative media. Along with Vanguard, the pair of asset managers are the top 2 owners of juggernaut media entities, including Time Warner, Comcast, Disney, and News Corp, which collectively represents 90% of the media ecosystem in the United States. So yeah, so this is part of the issue with our media, right? 90% of the major media is owned by, well, from here, 4 companies. 4 companies. But they don't have a vested interest in profit, right? Nothing good, nothing bad could come of that. And companies that do bad things all over the world. Nestle recently became a big customer of BlackRock when it moved its pension fund management to the firm. Interesting, considering BlackRock recently purchased 75,000 shares of Nestle in July of this year. It's got that circular thing going on, right? So if Nestle joins BlackRock and BlackRock buys a bunch of their shares, that's going to make their prices go up or help to stabilize it. And there's kind of market manipulation thing going on there, and especially with Nestle being one of the prime companies that are looking at taking water, bargain basement prices, and selling it back to the people. Right? That's a big issue that Nestle's dealing with, and that we need to stop them. Want more? It owns 265 shares of Bayer AG, formerly Monsanto, 5% of BP, 2.2% of Walmart with an $8 billion stake, 7.1 stake in McDonald's, a 4.1 stake of Dow Chemical. Honestly, the list goes on and on for pages. This information is all readily available because public companies are forced to disclose beneficial interest, meaning more than 5% in other companies. They must also disclose interests that equate to less than 5%, but those are more difficult to find. And remember that it's not just the interest through their EFTs and other funds. They have an enormous pile of cash used to manage direct investments as well. About the only thing they don't have is checking accounts. Okay, so another thing that you need to keep in mind here, and they kind of got into a circular thing going on here in that they have to disclose something more than 5% and stuff like that, but they can own, BlackRock could schedule purchasing of other funds which own portions of these other funds, which equates to effectively more than 5%, because there's so much circular stuff going on here. It's hard to really know how much they actually not necessarily own, but that they have influence over. It also owns significant stakes in war profiteers Lockheed, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman. Ironic considering the first 2 pages of Larry Fink's letter in the annual report last year was dedicated to criticizing Russia for invading Ukraine. Cool. Yeah, so we need to be BDSing the U.S. military-industrial complex and BDSing the fossil fuel industry. That's what we should be doing. Anything that's not that is greenwashing capitalism. Do as I say, not as I do. Fink regularly appears in interviews talking about creating a better future and praising the system of capitalism. Idiot. He's a firm believer in market solutions and views his principled stance on ESG as evidence of not manipulation, based in the logic of free market capitalism. I don't have a problem with that. He's not a Marxist economist or progressive. He sees opportunity in a clean energy future, and that's fine. The problem is that we appear to be on his timeline. Right, and it's just investing enough in it, but not at the rate at which we actually need the money invested. Like I said earlier in the stream, right? We need trillions and trillions of dollars invested right now in the global south and locally as well to shift to sustainable energy. Geothermal, right? Tidal, ocean, wave, and that sort of a thing. And to get off of fossil fuels completely. And that's not happening at the rate that we need it. Another principled stance that I align with somewhat is his feeling toward immigration. Time and again, Fink lobbies for more reasonable immigration policy because he understands the value of increasing the workforce. He sees this as stifling economic growth in much the same way that Milton Friedman did. Of course, here's the thing. It's not that they give a shit about fair and equitable immigration policy, it's just that they believe in letting people into the country to take jobs at abusive wages so the rest of us can enjoy open restaurants. Yeah, that's exactly it. If they let in immigrants, they can abuse them and exploit them. That's exactly it. His fear relates to wage inflation due to full employment. Again, driving the same result with very different intentions. Yeah. Yep. More people means more unemployment. And lower wages because they're immigrants and they can be exploited. So one might think that living on Larry's timeline is okay because he's the least bad option as America's shadow emperor. But when pressed on difficult issues, Larry will always land on the side of capital and profit rather than principle, right? That's my whole tension within methods of exchange, right? In everything, there is always that choice. Who is going to benefit? Yourself, or profit, or society? And what pretty much always wins? It's profit. And that leads to every single problem we have. It's here. In case you get bored. One of the rare times Fink was challenged on a broadcast because, remember, in a roundabout way, he's technically the boss of the networks, was on CNBC when he was asked to defend his position on Saudi investments after it was determined that the Saudi government had murdered and dismembered Saudi-born journalist Jamal Ahmad Khashoggi, who was a long-term American resident. Fink definitely dodges the discussion by essentially saying bad shit happens everywhere, so we have to choose our battles wisely. Fair. The life of a journalist and U.S. resident wasn't enough to move Fink to divestiture. Just as it wasn't enough to stop Biden from selling arms to the Saudi government. Right, and this is exactly it, right? And how long have we been doing deals with the Saudi government? I mean, how many innocent people has the Saudi government slaughtered because they were women, you know, who were caught without the proper male escort, who driving, or who were witches, or who, you know, whatever, or they were atheists or blasphemers or whatever, right? There's so many horrific reasons why the United States should cut ties with Saudi Arabia, the least of which is the fossil fuel, right? If the United States really cared about national security, then even the U.S. intelligence has said that energy security is a national security issue. We need to be on sustainable energy to get rid of our dependence upon the Saudis in fossil fuels. I mean, it's a no-brainer, honestly. So yeah, just the the slaughter of innocent people isn't something that the United States cares about because the United States does it itself. We are the largest terrorist organization in the whole world, right? The bottom line to Fink is the bottom line. The bottom line to the rest of us, where he and others like him are concerned, is that size matters. A sustainable future is possible if we want it, but where so many important areas of the economy are concerned, getting there will be very much on Larry Fink's timeline. And while he talks a great game, we all know how this turns out. Your student debt is a line item on his P&L, profit and loss statement, profit P&L. The murderous Saudi regime is a partner in the boardroom and in the bedroom, right? In fossil fuels, war and weapons are big business. Give them a lot of that. All-seeing technology that aggregates the world data and mitigates risk means that only catastrophe will change the investment equation into fossil fuels, and that means it will be too late. Right, and we are already in the end of days for climate change. It's just moving at climate scale. So it's not gonna just be one thing. It's gonna be it's not gonna be one ginormous thing. It's gonna be lots of just big things that are gonna be happening. Much like we're seeing through, like, Pakistan was flooded, right? And there's torrential rains and all sorts of stuff going on all around the world. There's climate catastrophes happening day by day. It's going to keep happening. Larry Fink took a seat at the table and traded his platform and expertise for a free pass. Now he's too big to fail. Best we stop looking for conspiracies because the reality is far more terrifying. Do as I say, not as I do. No matter which camp you're in, ESG is a scam. Larry Fink is the unelected president of the nation. It was time to regulate BlackRock. Here ended the lesson. Yeah, there you go. There you go. That was a long one. I'm going to go ahead and share this again in case you want to take a look at it again. There's a link to it. Oh, come on. Oh, I shared it twice. All right. Well, it's there. All right. Questions, comments, and suggestions before we move on. We've got some railroad stuff to talk about. Oh yeah, my mother asked me what I thought about the Queen dying, and I said, fuck the Queen. She's one of the OG imperialists and colonialists, right? I mean, the jewels inside the crown jewels are all basically stolen from Africa, right? Yeah, disband. The royal family is one of the last remaining vestiges of feudalism in Europe. It needs to go away. It needs to go away. Get rid of them. They provide no value to the UK. spend that money on housing, vertical farming, and all sorts of other stuff like that, because fuck the feudalism. Fuck the queen! Thank you, Pioneer Best Africans. Appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just people giving a flying fuck about royalty. This just the dystopia of people supporting the existence of royalty is just, it's mind-boggling. It really points to the significant privilege that white people have, right? Because the global north were the imperialists, were the colonialists that engaged in genocide and enslavement of the global south, especially Africa, right? And we have this, we in the global north have this privilege to not have experienced those horrors and to not have our countries looted. And like, what was the joke I've seen on Facebook? Why are the pyramids still in Egypt? Because Britain couldn't steal them to put in a museum. I mean, that's really what it's all about. Global North, including the United States, has been stealing from the global South for hundreds of years, and the original original gangster imperialist was Great Britain. So, and the Queen and the King were a part of that. I mean, they were alive during some of this stuff has happened. I mean, Britain itself has invaded, out of the 195 countries, 196, only 22, 23 of them were not invaded by Britain at one time or another. I mean, so yeah, fuck the Queen. Like Finland has a royal family or something like that too. They need to get rid of it. It just, you know, is as much as they are more advanced than most other countries. Finland, or is it Netherlands? I think it's the Netherlands. Well, at least one of them do. I mean, they should be getting rid of them too. I mean, every single country in the world should get rid of the concept of royalty and feudalism. It's fucked up. We're far beyond. We have far evolved. Well, I'd like to think we far evolved beyond the existence of that today. The $777 trillion check for African retributions. Yeah. Wow, that's a big number. Do you have a link on that, so I can read that? I would love to see that. I'd love to see that math. I've read a little bit about that, and I talk about reparations in here somewhere. I would like some more math on that. I approach it. Where is it? Here. Yeah, I talk about it a little bit. I need more research on that. So if you got a link on that number, I would love to see it. Okay, moving on. Railroad CEOs were paid over $200 million as workers suffered. Okay, did I? Yeah, I did. Okay. Rail execs defend themselves by claiming the skyrocketing profits do not reflect any contributions by labor. This is so fucking tone deaf, so like ignorant of the actual reality of it. Without the laborers doing the job, there is zero profit to be had anywhere. Fucking capitalism. All right. Thank you. How long is this? Not long. We'll finish this one and then we'll go ahead and read this. Thanks for sharing that. Appreciate that. So yeah, we'll finish this. This one isn't too long. Then we'll read this one on reparations. Awesome. Okay. As a major rail strike looms, rail executives have been reluctant to meet workers' demands for better pay, benefits, and time off. I wonder why that is. Random article I found after speeches. Okay, okay, all right. Cool. And if later on you find something that's even better than this one, let me know. I would love to read something a bit more in depth as well. Appreciate that. At the same time, the CEOs of five of the largest railroad conglomerates have been paid more than $200 million in the last 3 years, and company shareholders have been boosted nearly $200 billion in stock buybacks, which need to be outlawed, and dividends over the last dozen years. Yeah, anytime you see these numbers, stock buybacks, dividends, CEO payments, that's money that did not go to the workers. A sixth railroad giant is controlled by billionaire Warren Buffett, whose net worth jumped 50% during the pandemic to $100.1 billion. Buffett earlier this year bragged to shareholders about huge earnings, even after accounting for worker pay. The railroad had record earnings of $6 billion in 2021. He gushed in his annual letter. Here it should be noted, we are talking about the old-fashioned sort of earnings that we favor. A figure calculated after interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and all other forms of compensation. The railroad industry has defended the gap between worker pay, executive payouts by arguing that workers haven't contributed to the skyrocketing profits. This is so fucking stupid. I mean, if the workers stopped working, how much profit would they have? The railroad workers stopped working on the railroad, how much profit would they actually have at the end of the day? They would have nothing. Nothing. The companies maintain that capital investment and risk are the reasons for their profits, not any contribution by labor, a recent federal report noted. The contrast between gigantic executive pay packages and worker grievances is the context for a possible nationwide strike that has been long in the making. After years of cost cutting, workers say they are perennially short-staffed, aren't able to take sick leave due to draconian scheduling attendance policies, and that many in the rapidly aging workforce are so burned out they are leaving the industry. Yeah, at any time you privatize anything, they're always going to exploit the workers to maximize their profits. I mean, it's just the way capitalism is. It's all about, it's that tension with the methods of exchange that I keep sharing. That explains this whole thing. And this is like, their rail lines should be nationalized and have trillions dumped into it to have us catch up with the rest of the world where it comes to mass transportation, especially across the continent, across the country. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Total rail employment has decreased from over 427,000 in 1983 to less than 200,000 in 2021. In February, BNSF, the major railroad controlled by Warren Buffett, introduced a complex new attendance policy that, combined with inconsistent scheduling policies, left workers with very little free time when they were not on call. Since then, 700 union members have quit the company. The turnover is likely one of the reasons why BNSF has seen a 546% increase in unfilled freight orders, according to analysis of federal government data by the American Farm Bureau Federation. Worst condition for workers, a jackpot for execs. Exactly. As soon as something is privately owned, start cutting costs, cut salaries, cut service, and then profits go up for those who own it. While conditions for workers have worsened, executives have reaped a jackpot. On average, the CEOs of 5 major rail companies were paid more than $16 million in 2021 alone. Keith Creel, the CEO of Canadian Pacific Railway, scored a 58% raise in 2021, taking home a $26 million in compensation. James Foote, the CEO of the Rail Transportation Holding Company, CSX, got a 17% raise that same year, earning $16.6 million. Union Pacific CEO Lance M. Fritz was paid $14.5 million, 162 times the median employee salary at the company. Norfolk Southern's James Squire made just over $14 million, or 140 times the median worker. Canadian National's former CEO Jean-Jacques Rust earned a paltry $9 million by comparison. So when we're talking about this, I know people like comparing the top to the median. I think the median is bullshit. It should always be against the lowest paid worker. and that's how my policies approach it as well. I say the maximum income inequality between the top and the bottom worker, your top and bottom person in your company, including anyone you hire through another company, right? So if you're using slaves in Africa or child labor in Africa, that needs to be taken into account as measured against what the CEO is making. Highest paid to the lowest paid worker. And that maximum should be 9. So the CEO should not be making 9 times more than the lowest paid worker in the entire company. That's the way I approach it. And then I also have a maximum wage of 9 times the lowest, and then also a marginal tax rate of 100% at that maximum wage. So anything you make over that maximum wage is taken by the government, period, full stop. If your politician does not have a maximum wage in there, as well as other things like that, then they're not serious about dealing with inequality. Sure, get to the conversation about, people who are rich don't actually have a wage. They don't take in money. They have other ways of maintaining their riches. And then there are other policies that I have to help tackle that, right? We've got transaction taxes, net wealth taxes, which are going to be needed to tackle things like that until we can get it to the point where they're taking in money and that's what they're making, and then we get rid of most of their wealth too through wealth taxes. All right. Even more railroad profits have been going into stock buybacks and dividends, which benefits executives and wealthy shareholders. According to the chairman of the Federal Surface Transportation Board, which oversees the nation's railroads, since 2010, the major American railroad companies have spent $146 billion in buying up stock off the market to deliver profits to their shareholders, and paid out an additional $50 billion in dividends. In total, the companies have devoted $196 billion to buybacks and dividends that benefit their executives and shareholders, far more than the $138 billion they spent on infrastructure improvements during the same period. So it's, buybacks, make them illegal, and have them dump it all into the workers and into improving infrastructure. That's never going to happen as long as profit is a part of this question. The rail industry has sucked profits out of their workforce to pay big dividends and compensate stockholders, said Ron Minkow, General Secretary of the Cross Union Railroad Workers United. They jack up prices, cut costs, poorly maintain their locomotives and facilities just to make money. Is this a good thing for American people? Yeah, that's capitalism. When businesses get involved in something, this is what happens every single time. That is the tension within methods of exchange. That is the natural result of what capitalism does. In order to make profit and to be competitive and to, keep doing what they're doing, they have to jack up prices, cut costs, not maintain things, and exploit everyone for profit. It's never not going to be the way that it is as long as monetary systems exist. An upcoming vote. On Thursday, railroad workers and freight rail companies reached a tentative agreement to avert a nationwide strike. Deal brokered by President Jim Crow dementia Joe Biden would provide workers overdue raises, allow for unpaid sick leave under certain conditions, and cap employees' medical expenses. However, more than 100,000 railroad workers still need to vote to approve the deal. Hopefully they reject that shit. Bring them to their fucking knees. Key players say their colleagues still don't know enough about the proposed agreement to make a final decision. I've seen that they like 2 weeks of leave of sick time or something like that, which is nowhere near enough to make up for how much they've lost over the last however much time. I don't have a clue what the agreement says Kaminkow. I can't even tell you if the agreement says 1 sick day is allowed or 3. The language we have seen does not give us a clue. It's what Kaminkow says. It's premature to declare the crisis has passed. At this point, the union leadership and the White House want to have a victory lap, he said, but workers still have the final say and can vote it down. Maybe the rank and file will join that party, but right now we don't understand what the hell we're looking at. Union workers have been negotiating with rail companies to address their grievances since 2019. However, such negotiations are governed by the Railway Labor Act, which requires a far more complex series of steps than other labor negotiations. Wonder why that is. What's more, long-standing railroad allies like House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer from Maryland, Democrat from Maryland, have threatened workers by saying that Congress will pass legislation banning them from striking if needed. Such legislation could violate international labor law, which enshrines the right to strike as a fundamental right of workers. Yeah, I mean, that's fucking stupid. So stupid. So stupid. On August 17th, an emergency board Biden convened on the labor negotiations, recommended workers receive a 24% raise over a 5-year period, along with increased coverage of healthcare costs. They've got... What? No? I mean... Not over a 5-year period, 2-year period maybe. They're raking in enough profit that why would you do it over 5 years? That's fucking stupid. American Association of Railroads, an industry group, welcomed the board's proposal, saying the recommendation should set the framework for a negotiated agreement between railroads and unions. However, the rail workers expressed concern that the proposal offers no changes to the work rules that had allowed for the draconian attendance and scheduling practices. So listen, if they offer appropriate money and benefits, they'll have a lot more people working. I mean, the reason why they're in this situation is they cut benefits, they cut hours, they exploited the workers, they not maintaining their stuff, and then people started quitting and stuff. If you get back to cutting CEO pay and giving all that money to the workers, you won't ever have a problem. It's not rocket surgery. The proposed agreement reached Thursday, which workers will vote on in the coming days, appears to allow for more scheduling flexibility and unpaid sick time. Unpaid sick time? Are you fucking kidding me? But since none of the rail workers have yet to see the entire deal, some are already taking to social media to express their concerns. All right, there you go. Questions, comments, suggestions on this? I have another article on this, but we're going to hit this Quartz Africa thing on reparations. Let's check it out. Anything? Anybody? Anybody? From 1853. Ooh, I've got a blog post I have started writing on how to deal with racism and bullying in schools, and part of that, a large part of that post is talking about systemic and structural racism in our country, and I think I may have to use this in there too, because that's a good advertising to use. Lexington, Kentucky, July 2nd, 1853. $1,200 to $1,250 for Negroes. Yikes. How long is this? Ooh, she's got some teeth to it. Okay, we're probably not gonna finish this. Okay, this is pretty long. Yikes. Okay. Well, we'll get the start at least, so we can at least start seeing what the article is going to talk about. But then you can go ahead and finish it later. This is probably going to take us an hour to get through, and I'll definitely probably stop at 5. So half an hour, a little over half an hour now. What is Ode Africa? This is from October 13th, 2020, so it's got a few years on it, but it was last updated July 21st, so last year. No, this year, July 21st, 2022. So it was updated this year. All right, this is Lindsay. Oh, no idea. Not heard of her. This is Quartz Africa. All right, let's do this. Standing on... There we go. Standing on an auction block in chains, an African man in good health could sell for over $1,200 in New Orleans in the decade before the U.S. Civil War. A girl of 9 or 10 could fetch $1,400 under the right market conditions. Pricing took into account a man's strength or a girl's ability to bear children for resale. Oh my fucking god. Here is the epitome right here, the epitome of what capitalism is. The deliberate commodification of human life, right there. Calculating the value of a life is complex, but as slavery has taught us, it's been done before. Centuries, Africans were reduced to property in North and South America and the Caribbean. Slave traders had no trouble pricing human life, and abolition-era economists repaid slave owners for the loss of their freed slaves. Yes, that is true. Abolition-era economists repaid slave owners for the losses of their freed slaves. What should have happened is every single one of those capitalist piece of shit people should have been well, lost everything and then just basically put in jail for crimes against humanity, if not, at least in that era, put to death for crimes against humanity. But, you know, capitalism wins. It's only when the descendants of those slaves return to ask for compensation for their lost ancestors does counting become difficult, right? And when we want to talk about reparations, this is kind of something that I talk about as well. Like, where do we start drawing those lines? Oops, started girls bearing children at the youngest age. Get the most value out of them. Yep. As soon as puberty starts, and that's as time has gone on, puberty has started earlier and earlier. I think a lot of that has to do with stress and chemicals in our foods and stuff like that. So I don't know what the average, age where puberty starts in girls back then, but I mean, yikes. Yeah, it's all about getting, just like they say up here, right? It's about a girl of 9 or 10 could fetch $1,400 in the right market conditions. Pricing took into account a man's strength or a girl's ability to bear a child for resale. So how many children could she have over her life before she eventually murdered or hit menopause, if she ever survived that long, right? Yeah, it's horrific. Horrific to even think about. So when we're talking about reparations, for me, it's a very difficult thing. Where do we start drawing those lines? For me, it's not just about, people from descendants of Africa. For me, it's about the First Peoples, right? The Native Americans. It's pretty much every single community, every single culture around the world which has people of color in it. The United States and Britain specifically has had a hand at colonizing, engaging cultural and other forms of actual physical genocide against people of color. So it's not just, not just Africa. It's pretty much every single indigenous population throughout the world that has been affected by the United States and the Great Britain in their imperialism and colonialism and slavery, genocide. Similarly, the loss of life from the African continent due to the transatlantic slave trade has a real cost. Africa wasn't just deprived of lost manpower and income, but also creativity, innovation, and relationships. And resources too. Culture, it deprived of manpower, income, but also creativity, innovation, and relationships. Resources and culture. This is part of colonization is cultural genocide, like the destruction of their culture and their religion, which is a part of that culture. Those losses were multiplied by millions of lives over hundreds of years, stunting the development of a continent whose governments have since struggled to find the will to ask for restitution. Right, because they don't have the economic power to do it. Much like we were talking about COP26, right, from last year. The moment that Africa and other countries who are primarily people of color, if they came to one of these, COP20, like COP27 coming up in this November, if they actually came there, as I said, swinging, asking for reparations for the horrors inflicted upon them by the global north wouldn't show up anymore to these to these environmental things. So it's yeah, white people. So I want to point out also there was this amazing article. Where did I talk about it? And if you haven't read this, no, it's over here. Where is it? There's, hold on, Ripper. There's an article by Jackson Hinkle, I think it is. I'll talk about it over here. Let me hold on, let me pull this up for you. There's this amazing article that I reference in How Might a Resource-Based Economy Play Out if it ever did. He talks about decolonizing Africa. This was such, here it is, Pan-African Decolonized Union. Down here. That's what I call it, right here. So here, I'll go ahead and share this with you. This article, when I read it, it's about using MMT, modern monetary theory, as a way of Africa working towards decolonizing itself and throwing off the shackles of the global North imperialism and colonialism. That inspired me to add this whole section to this post, looking at Africa as a way of, using that sort of a thing to be kind of the tipping point with which to start the creation of a resource-based economy. Read that article, it was really great. Okay, here we go. Okay, yes, restitution. There's no need to further justify reparations for Africans and the African diaspora to redress the legacy of slavery and colonialism. What needs to be discussed now is how those reparations will be paid out and to whom, right? That is the question. That will require not only economic dexterity, but empathetic imagination. Okay, good. It's a really good read, Now, when my policies, when I think about the implementation of my policies, I really look at, like, let me give you an example. Education, right? Here in the United States, if you're not familiar, the schools are funded by local property taxes. So poorer counties, poorer cities have poorly funded schools. Rich counties, rich cities have high property values and therefore have very well funded schools, right? So that's one thing that is an example of systemic and structural racism inherent to the way our country is put together. So one of the ways we can help deal with that, and I tackled the wealth and income inequality issue in schooling in 3 different phases. The first is all the money that for like a state gets pulled together and then redistributed back to the individual school districts. Maybe someone else more smarter than I will have to figure out how to do this math, but ultimately basically put it back out to the districts based on the number of kids going to that school, so that there's an equal amount of money going to each district, whether in a rich or poor district. Then you take a look at every district in the state and figure out how much does their infrastructure cost. So if you've got schools that are well funded, have computer labs and air conditioning, right? You figure out what that cost is per student, or taking into account staff too, probably. And then you figure out what the best funded school in that state, how much infrastructure there is per person, per student. Then you give that the same amount of money to all the other districts to increase their infrastructure, so that the poorer communities have the same basic infrastructure as one of the rich communities. So we try and equal out the infrastructure, we try and equal out the amount of money going to them, and then we look at the amount of money going to the teachers. So then what about the red line communities? Right, I just explained that, right? Because the money from the poor communities and the rich communities get pulled together and then redistributed back to all the districts. so that they all have the same amount of money per student. And then the infrastructure as well, right? The poorer districts, since they have less infrastructure, they will receive an amount of money that will allow them to increase their infrastructure equal to the richest community, like that. I know that's the biggest thing to do, to get all of the poorer communities caught up to the richer communities, so that they have the equal amount of to do, but it's what needs to be done. What is the third way? Well, part of that will be universal healthcare, universal education, right? Universal daycare, raising the minimum wage to well, at this point it's probably about $70,000 or $80,000 for minimum wage. Then the maximum wage will be almost $700,000 with a marginal tax rate of 100% at that 700,000 or whatever it is. So we have to equalize the infrastructure throughout the state and equalize the amount of money going to each school throughout the state, so that the districts and poor communities, the children from there will have an equal, economic opportunity, at least within the district, to have a great education. Now, outside of that, minimum wage will be a large part of helping to help equalize that. There's only so much you can do on the outside, as long as money is a part of the problem. As long as money is in the equation, right? Universal healthcare, universal education, housing is a human right, minimum wage, maximum wage, those sorts of things will help to make sure that at least children outside of schools will have a chance. Now, part of this conversation can be, well, how do we make up the wealth inequality problem? That is a huge issue too, right? The intergenerational wealth problem. I don't know my policies don't approach that yet, because I don't know how to do that, much like this article will talk about, right? 777 trillion. I need to find a way of dealing with that wealth inequality gap. That's something I'm hopefully this article will help me figure out. Did that make sense to you, Pan Arabist Africanist, about how to deal with that? I'm going to go into it a little more. Try to make the poorer schools have the same money coming in and infrastructure as the richer schools. Oh, and we outlaw private schools. That's another part of it. Outlaw charter schools, outlaw private schools as well. So that way they're all taking part of the same educational pool. Okay, counting the cost. Before the Portuguese arrived in what is today Angola, just after the turn of the 15th century, the Arab states had a thriving slave trade on the continent, and Africans themselves enslaved other Africans captured in battle. Right, so I talk about this, like this is kind of a argument that white people will say, well, Africans enslaved other Africa, so it's not that bad, right? Well, right. I mean, no, but yes, they did enslave other Africans, but why is that? And I talk about that in my do I talk about that directly? In my post that I'm working on about bullying and racism in the schools, right? Slavery came first as an economic, to help deal with economic pressures to workforce, and war is very similar. War and slavery had to deal with resources and workforce, right? And then racism came later on. Well, at least in the United States, following the what was it? The white indentured servants were slowly going down, so they needed a way to make sure that the lower class white indentured servants weren't working or sympathizing too much with the black slaves, and that's how racism was created in the United States, at least specifically. Yeah, as long as, and I have another post I'm working on talking about how scarcity is the primary driver for this sort of thing, where scarcity creates inequality, creates slavery, war, violence, creates classism, racism, creates all this sort of stuff. The shift that humanity went through from the Paleolithic hunter-gatherer society to the Neolithic Revolution, agrarianism and farming, is where all this stuff started. Everything went bad starting there. All right. But it was the transatlantic trade, rooted in capitalism and imperialistic expansion and requiring the mass kidnapping of human beings on an industrial scale, that is perhaps most pressing right now, as Black Lives Matter protests grip the U.S. and colonial-era statues fall in Europe. The descendants of those slaves, the African diaspora, are demanding justice. It's time that Africa, the continent on whose losses Europe and the Americas were built, join that demand. Agreed. 100% agreed. Approximately 12.5 million people were enslaved and taken from Africa, according to a widely accepted figure from the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database. Ooh, they got a whole database on there. Look at that. But some estimates argue that as many as 20 million people were enslaved. Yeah, I have a feeling it's going to be fairly hard to get a very solid number on this. Then here's that flyer here that we were talking about earlier. Then there are the population estimates that could have been. Some scholars believe that before the beginning of the slave trade in the middle of the 15th century, Africa's population could have been as large as 270 million. This kind of population density, 15 to 20 people per square kilometer, the equivalent of Europe, would have led to developments that could have kept Africa in step with the rest of the global economy, according to historians. True statement. Such a dense population must have been predicated on agro-technological capabilities on par with those of Europe at the time, wrote late Senegalese French historian Louis Marie Diop Maes. I'm messing that name up. I apologize. Assuming it's French. Senegal has had French imperialism, right? Pretty sure. Those estimates reject the myth of an underdeveloped, underpopulated African continent that lagged behind the development of the West. The region had demographic, climatic, and agricultural conditions that made it ripe for progress. Argue otherwise is to rely on a racist notion that Africans simply did not possess the inherent capability to create their own communal and individual fates. A misconception that has often served as a justification for the slave trade and its brutality. By Diop Maes, any reparations should consider the loss of 100 million lives, not just the 12.5 million captured. Okay, yep, sure. But their descendants who might have otherwise contributed to, Africa's uninterrupted development. Okay, that makes sense. Yep. So there's the concept of, where do I share that? The effective altruism? What is it? There's this great video by Kurzgesagt, which looks at selfish altruism, right? More people there are, better chance you have of having a better life. And that is that here? Right down here. Egotistical altruism. This is a great video by Kurzgesagt. Right, the more people you have, the more, what's it called? Specialization of labor is possible, and the more development that is possible. Also, wasn't the richest person in the history of humanity, what the fuck's his name? It's an African guy, right? So, I mean, Africa has never been poor. It's just been looted for hundreds and hundreds of years. Had Africa not been looted and had genocide inflicted upon them, where would they be now? And that's kind of what she's talking about here. If white people in the global north hadn't come there and destroyed Africa, where would they be now? What is the socioeconomic cost to pay for that? Or yeah. Slavery didn't just deprive Africa of its population, but stabilized its institutions. The continent's economy was reduced to a monoculture of selling human beings at the expense of developing other resources. Said Babacar Mabaye, a professor of English at Kent State University in Ohio, whose work quantifies the economic, political, and social impact of the slave trade. As a result, the once strong and developed African states lost their stability and became fragmented by internal and external conflicts that still affect the continent today. Right, and when when the white people left, they left Africans filled the capitalist colonizer position, and people in Africa changed white colonists for black colonists. That's because of capitalism. Capitalism doesn't care. Exploitation is the name of the game. African states no doubt played their own role in the slave trade. The entrenched poverty of the Central African Republic, for example, is attributed to the raids and kidnappings carried out by rival tribes in league with European slavers in the centuries before the French carved up what remained. So traumatized were the early tribes. They found it was safer to remain in small groups rather than develop the larger communities that were vulnerable for raiders. The quasi-aristocratic African slaver class. Yep, yeah, so there's the fight for black colonizers, right? Created through trade with the West, was parasitic and relied on its connection to the slave ships sailing across the Atlantic, says Mabaye, suffocating any real political power that might have emerged in Africa. The power of these slaver classes was based on the ability to trade with the West, and they were often usurped by stronger mercenaries who took over their trade by force. None of these rulers were viewed with any real legitimacy by the already fragmented local communities, making it near impossible to establish a political legacy, much less one that could stand up to Western exploitation or even negotiate a fair exchange. Yet what you ask for. If basing a calculation on what might have been seems beyond reach, reparations activists ever find their calculations creating a practical model for reparations to Africa for the transatlantic slave trade and the gaping holes in development left behind. When the earliest formal request for reparations to Africa began in 1992, the year I graduated high school, when a group dubbed the Eminent Persons came together under the auspices of the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union. It was led by wealthy Nigerian businessman and former President-elect Chief Bashirun MKO Abiola, and championed by Kenyan academic Ali Mazrui. The eclectic group also included a U.S. congressman, economists, historians, politicians, and South African singer and activist Miriam Makeba. For the reparations movement to work, Mazrui argued it needed to connect Africa and the diaspora, creating what he called a worldwide crusade for reparations for the African and black world as a whole. That meant looking beyond money and finding realistic ways to address the imbalance between Africa and the West. Mazrui argued for the empowerment of African people and states in relationship to the current world order. Yeah, I mean, that's really why I talk about, when we talk about climate change, trillions and trillions needs to be sent to Africa. I mean, trillions and trillions per year to deal, with climate change and to help make sure that the African countries bypass the fossil fuel era and shift to sustainable energy and make sure that they've got housing and sanitation and food to feed their people, especially with climate change coming. Climate change is here and it's already murdering people. I mean, that just needs to be done. I mean, what is it? I just say trillions and trillions. Like, the United States needs to do trillions and trillions. Europe as a whole needs to be doing trillions and trillions, right? And honestly, we should probably do the United States by itself, trillions and trillions. The UK, trillions and trillions. Well, no. Every single country in Europe needs to be throwing trillions to Africa, Central and South America, and get them all upgraded to first world country. For Mazrui, in the 1990s, reparations from Western countries meant reducing their support for African tyrants, supporting democracy on the continent, giving African states a louder voice in international organizations, and canceling their debt. Yeah, I talk about that stuff in my policies too. Ending the IMF and the World Bank as forms of economic terrorism or systemic and structural racism in geopolitical scales. Yep. Mazrui and the group of eminent persons devised what they called the Middle Passage Plan, inspired by the post-World War II Marshall Plan. Just as the U.S. transferred more than $13 billion, or $140 billion in today's dollars, For the rebuilding of Europe, so too would former slave-owning and colonial nations transfer capital toward rebuilding Africa. The Middle Passage Plan, no, it's behind a paywall, it looks like. The JSTOR, yeah. Would include a skills transfer to Africa with scholarships for African students. The plan also called for a power transfer, giving greater voting rights to Africans on the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the United Nations Security Council. UN Security Council. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, so we just need to get rid of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund because they are bad. UN Security Council is a fucking joke. Needs to be disbanded. A ledger of reparations and a calculus of causality. To those overwhelmed by how to calculate the value of these reparations, Mazrui devised a ledger of reparations and a calculus of causality. The calculation relied on rough percentage estimates of how much the present underdevelopment and inequality was linked to the past. For Mazrui, it was roughly 40%, but just how to calculate that percentage generated more unknowns than knowns. Yeah, and then you've got, right, compounding interest on that harm, right? You got kind of a butterfly effect thing going on here, right? Just one raid for slaves just pays massive dividends over years of suppressing what's going on, suppressing their culture, suppressing their economic activity and their potential growth. We're dealing not merely with the history of bondage, but also with the bondage of history, Mazrui said it in a 1992 lecture in Boston. The history of bondage includes, of course, the history of enslavement and the slave trade. The bondage of history, on the other hand, is the extent to which, a considerable degree, we are all prisoners of our history. Okay. That extent would need to be calculated by another generation. The eminent persons avoided assigning a number to each life lost, arguing that it would trivialize the victim's sacrifices. Yep. However, a truth commission in Accra tried to do just that in 1999, reaching a total of $777 trillion, excluding interest. Excluding interest. Ooh. Although how they arrived at that figure is unclear. Another figure calculated by the academic Daniel Tete Osabu Clay in a 2000 article published in the Journal of Black Studies put the cost of reparations at $100 trillion, assigning a value of $75,000 per person lost based on the model of historic development and population growth of Asia over the same period. Now, this should also include interest. Compounding interest in that. A missed opportunity. About a decade later, a new group of Africans took up the discussion at the United Nations World Conference Against Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance in Durban in 2001. At least 3 of the eminent persons group were in attendance, and the request remained largely the same. Africans entered the discussion with confidence and gusto, finally able to collectively put their demands for redress to the representatives of a system under whose boot they still suffered. The discrimination we see today is a social atavism of the centuries of inhuman practices, says Enoch Kabendele, former president of Zambia, at the conference. We have a chance and opportunity today to contribute to a better world where racism and discrimination will come to an end. Again, I apologize for butchering the names. Nothing personal, I'm just an American. So yeah, and another part of this whole conversation, is capitalism is inherently racist, classist, sexist. I mean, it's got all these horrible things that are just inherent to it. You can't truly get beyond, you never have an opportunity to truly get beyond racism, to get beyond sexism or classism, unless you get beyond capitalism. And not just, when I say capitalism, I don't just mean capitalism as in a technical, economic system or whatever, but I mean, when I say capitalism like this, I mean monetary systems. Money, debt. As long as there is profit to be made off the suffering of others or the environment, racism, slavery, exploitation will always exist. Full stop. And I don't talk about, I talk about this a bit in here, in my Cancer of Capitalism post, but I don't get into the slavery aspects of it yet, but the sentiment is in there. Despite a robust debate from non-governmental organizations, African government representatives seem to have lost their nerve. While the final declaration acknowledged slavery as a crime against humanity, and that colonialism led to racism and racial discrimination, good, it left loopholes. It acknowledged the victims of these wrongs have the right to seek justice and adequate reparation and satisfaction, but fell short of creating an internationally recognized and binding agreement. Yeah, as long as white people are going to be held accountable, nothing is going to happen. And that's much the same complaint I have with, COP26 and COP27. We talked about that earlier. As long as the moment that white people, the global north, the financiers are going to be held accountable, you'll lose all funding, all power, all everything. The final wording also reflected lobbying by the Netherlands, the UK, Spain, and Portugal, all former slave trading nations, that an official apology would leave temporary governments open to lawsuits. Many were dissatisfied with the agreement, but conceded that it would at least lay the foundation for future talks. The conference ended on September 7th. Just days later, the Twin Towers would fall in the 9/11 attack, shifting the world's attention and reshaping the geopolitical arena. Okay, if we're going to get into conspiracy theories, what if founding of the Twin Towers or the September 11 attacks was just to do just that? They do not wish to ruffle the feathers of these powerful institutions. Exactly, right. And if people from Africa and Central South America, Middle East were actually going to go to try and hold the global north accountable, they would just be ignored. And that's the fundamental problem. That just shows the systemic and structural racism visceral to the whole system. That the horrific crimes against humanity inflicted upon people from Africa and India and the entire global south can be just unilaterally dismissed because it would inconvenience people in power. It's horrific. Nearly 20 years later, Cavendella says African leaders have lost the sense of Pan-Africanism that drove his generation to demand an audience with former colonial leaders. And, much like I think Jackson Hickel's article talks about the decolonization of Africa, that is what we're going to need. I know there's kind of a movement there in Africa to shift to a more Pan-African idea. Like there's going to be working on getting a Pan-African passport and other things like that, and I think that's good. And honestly, if African countries came together as a unified organization, they could leverage definitely some geopolitical, if not economic, power over the global north to get some shit to happen, but they have to work together. Individually, they can be ignored. Get the Pan-African Decolonized Union, like I talk about in my article on how resource-based economy might come into being. Yeah, good. I'm glad I have a clue. That's really what it takes. If they don't act together, they will be ignored. That's just the way it is. Without, especially countries which have been historically exploited by the global north, if they don't work together and come together and say, hey, this shit's gonna stop and you're gonna pay us, and then leverage their economic and resource and collective geopolitical power, then nothing is gonna happen. And that's, Africa should get rid of their colonial borders and unite. Sure, they could do that. Yeah, that's one thing. It's hard to get rid of borders because that is so inherent to capitalism, but I would agree with you. If they were one country, getting rid of the borders, having the borders means they're going to compete, and that's the fundamental problem. If they were one united African state working together, Yeah, unified currency, unified passport. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I hadn't quite thought about it to that extent, but yeah, that would be a lot easier for them to wield and leverage power over the global north to get reparations and to become a part of the power structures on a geopolitical scale. Agree. Agree. The new leaders who have come have not been the original freedom fighters. These are subsequent leaders who have found most things already made, already there, said Cavandella, now a wealthy businessman. The new leaders are happy to go to the IMF and the World Bank to talk about loans to their countries. Fuck that. And yet I think they should be talking about compensation and reparation. Yeah, I agree. That's exactly the way I approach it. Same for the Middle East. Yes, exactly. Yeah, as long as they are in smaller countries, they can be ignored. Yeah, Middle East, yeah, Indonesia, that whole entire area should unite. Yep, agreed. Yeah, and again, much like that article from Jackson Hickel, I also talk about that in my post on how resource-based economy might come into being with the Pan-African Decolonized Union. Ultimately, they start working together, unifying their countries together, and then unilaterally cast off the chains of the World Bank and the IMF. And then start that. When I talk about reparations, and I talk about the World Bank and the IMF, basically the IMF and World Bank, I mean, they need to be gotten rid of as an organization, but if we're going to keep them, then all of the loans that are to the African, to the global south need to be basically canceled or turned into grants. And then more money needs to be basically just given to them. That trillions and trillions that needs to go to Africa and the Middle East. That can be the way, that can be one of the places where that money comes from, or how it gets funneled to all these organizations, to all these countries as a part of reparations. Barring that, get rid of both organizations and have the money come directly from the countries themselves. There's always the fear that they do not wish to ruffle the feathers of these powerful institutions yet. Those are the same people, the same institutions that owe us money. Yeah, exactly. We've already covered this. That's exactly right. Cavandella is hopeful that the African Union today could negotiate as a bloc and work out an equitable redistribution of reparations. The obstacle to that, he believes, is the same one he encountered in Durban all those years ago. The sharing is not too much of a problem. The problem is the ability of the former colonialists to pay. That's not really a problem. Yeah, it's... Well, for the member states of the EU individually, that is a problem because they are in the European Union and there's only one centralized bank. Although, how much displacement of African people will take place? Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's why I when I talk about the climate change and my environmental policies, reparations is a part of that just because of that. The climate refugees from the global south, specifically Africa, is going to be huge. And where are they going to go? They're going to keep going north and north and north. Eventually, they're going to the United States, South America, various other countries. And if we don't empower Africa to deal with and weather the horrors of climate change, they're just going to come up, up to the north. It's a national security issue to not help Africa and all these other countries deal with climate change. I mean, it's fucking stupid. Too many will literally be... Yeah, no, it's already that way now. I mean, like in the Middle East, there's wet bulb temperatures going on. There's places in Africa, yeah, where it hasn't rained for like 2 years, right? A lot of Africa already is unlivable because of climate change, and just many people are just dying. And much like this article here, right? Africa's on the front lines of climate change, but not on the front pages. This is the problem. This is white man's privilege, right? We ignore the plight of Africa and the Middle East. I mean, if the media actually served humanity, Africa would be on the front page, would be on every single news source. because the horrors that is happening there and will be happening there over these next 10 years till 2035 or something like that is going to be horrific, and it'll be a blip on our news and then it'll be gone. That's it. People dying there, whatever, because we are in such a huge position. Yeah, oh yeah, China too. Yep. But they have the ability to help deal with their issues better because they have the money and the resources to help deal with that. I think they'll be able to weather that a hell of a lot better than Africa will. Most definitely. Yeah, pretty much every country is going to be impacted by this. There's going to be, record high temperatures everywhere, all throughout the world. And the global south will be where it's hit the most. And global south, Central South America, Africa. They have at least 2 years of food stockpiled, droughts, no more drinking water. Yeah. Oh no, exactly right. This is exactly the horrors that they're going to be dealing with. And again, if the global north is not working to make sure that they have access to water and food, specifically through vertical farming and sustainable energy and all that sort of stuff, then we're fucking over our own individual countries. It's ridiculous. All right, it's 5 o'clock. I gotta get going, guys. Any last minute comments from you guys before we call this a day? I'd just like to say thank you so much for gifting me with your time. I really do appreciate it. And thanks, Pan Arabist Africanist, for sharing this article. I will read this later as well. And everyone else, please go ahead and finish reading this. This sounds like an amazing. So far, it's a really great article on the topic of reparations and how complex this issue is. I talked about my struggles with it as well. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. You're so kind. Thank you. Good game. Thank you so much. Thank you. Again, I stream on 2 o'clock U.S. Central Time here till 5 each week. Eventually, someday, I'll add another day in, but we'll see. Thank you so much for your time, guys. Have a great week. Stay COVID free. And yeah, have a great week. Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.